Hi, Hal.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much for wanting to talk to me about warning sign. It is very much appreciated.
I guess I have a question for you to start off.
Of course, yes.
What got you interested in Warning Sign, if I may ask?
Well, I think it was a film that I had probably seen a few years ago. One of those things that, like a lot of films, it makes an impact and then other things sort of happen. And I was
Yeah.
talking to Jim Bloom for a couple of Star Wars events. And the one thing we sometimes talk about other projects that people do, and one of the things that he really raved on about was warning sign, and that triggered a distant bell. And I thought, well, let's have a reevaluate this. And so it's kind of Jim sparked the notion. So and
Okay. Just curious.
Yeah, I assume it's a film that's very much very close to your heart, I imagine, this project.
Well, I haven't. It's been 38 years since I made Warning Sign, and it's a long time. And I've done a lot of other stuff since. I don't think about it very often, and haven't until recently when I realized we were going to do this. I suddenly thought I better do some homework.
Right.
So, I mean, that's really the situation.
Because this was, am I right in saying this was your only feature film that you directed? Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Like my writing partner Matthew, Matthew Robbins, we wrote the movie together. This is the last project we did write together, actually.
Yeah.
And we're still pals, but I diverged. I knew I was going to diverge even before I made this movie into the world of video games. Yeah. And I spent 30 years as a designer and developer of video games after Warning Sign. And that's a different world altogether. But it's my only attempt to direct because of a couple of things. First of all, like Matthew, I went to film school with him at USC, and but I studied animation.
Right.
And I'm an art major from way back. So my interest in film originally was in the world of animation. And my interest in directing movies was long delayed as a result of that, directing live action.
Right.
And so I thought it would be, I wanted to do it, and eventually got very, very interested but I began to realize that my interests were taking me somewhere else. And on top of that, I realized also that unless for some reason you have a very big hit, or in some particular genre or whatever, then just becoming a director for hire is not going to happen. And it would be a question of writing other projects and then getting them going, and then perhaps on that basis I could direct other movies. And I sort of looked into the future, and I thought, well, okay, at the rate this is going, it means that maybe in the course of my career I'll get to do half a dozen movies.
Right.
And I think that was a very productive way to live my life. So I quickly decided that I should very seriously pursue the idea of developing video games. So I did.
Yeah. Does that give you more control of your career and more stable?
Yes.
As you mentioned the video game side of things, I was quite curious because you worked on several Indiana Jones games and the Star Wars game. Were those kind of exciting projects?
I'm sorry, pardon me?
Were the Indiana Jones games and the Star Wars game interesting projects? Were they exciting to do?
Oh, very. I'm still very, very proud of those games. Yes. The first one I did is an adventure game called Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. And it was a follow-on to other people at the company, LucasArts, George's company.
Yeah.
That had done a video game adaptation of the Last Crusade. But those guys were pretty burned out by the experience of doing that, and they thought, well, they had been hanging around the company. George and I were friends, and was hanging around his burgeoning company, and the guys there who had done Last Crusade thought, hey, we want to do another one of these games, but we don't want to do it. Let's get Hal in and get him to do it. So that was my opportunity to jump into that world professionally.
Yeah.
I'd already done stuff on my own. I knew how to do this stuff. And anyway, So that was fun. It was a good experience and a very big hit. So.
Were you able to contribute a lot creatively from a writing point of view? Were you able to sort of dictate a bit of the?
Yeah, the story is completely original. They wanted to hand me a rejected screenplay and make that the story for the follow-on game, and it was a terrible screenplay.
Right.
Thank God it was never made into a Jones movie. And so I just developed a story on my own, and then designed the game with the help of my pal Noah Falstein.
And are you looking forward to the new Indiana Jones film? Is it something that's still something that you enjoy, the Indiana Jones film?
Oh, absolutely. I love that world, which is a world where the fantasy, it's kind of urban fantasy where you have the here and now in an exaggerated form, with a fantastic overlay that infects the actual world. And I just love that kind of thing. So I'm very interested in Jones, and I look forward to number 5, and we'll see how Harrison looks when he's been de-aged. That'll be fun.
Yes, that does look interesting, yeah. So going from more sort of fantasy projects to more sort of gritty with Warning Sign, what gave you the idea in the first place for Warning Sign?
Well, we were coming off Dragon Slayer, and we had worked on another film called The Grid, which did not get made. That's basically the story of screenwriters. They write a lot of stuff and it doesn't get made. And Matthew and I are not the only ones. Matthew's still writing screenplays, and most of them don't get made either. But every now and then one does. And I was looking for a project that I could take on. And the idea of doing a film in kind of a hothouse environment where everything, the whole story was under control, would make it an appropriate debut for me as a director.
Yeah.
And so I cooked up this idea. And you have to remember that at the moment, one of the things I'm not in love with about the film is the hand-wringing over biotechnology. I thought that was, now that I look back, it feels exaggerated. But at the time, you have to remember, we were at toward the end of the Cold War, but it was pretty scary. And we were, the United States was very worried about biowarfare and atomic warfare and all that stuff. And there's just a different social atmosphere that was going on in the 80s. We were 1 year after, when I made the movie, we were just after a moment where the world almost did have an atomic war, where there was a big incident where the Russians got very nervous that we were planning an attack. And anyway, so it seemed like a great way to do a drama, and that's what got me interested. So I cooked up this idea that there was a secret project that was being masqueraded as agricultural, and and everything would there'd be a leak, and we could trap everybody, and okay, all I have to do is do a lot of interiors.
So from the genesis of the idea to actually filming, how long was it? Was it a battle to get it made, or was it relatively straightforward in terms of getting the green light?
Well, it was one of those things where it just seemed to work. I had the idea, Matthew and I fleshed it out and wrote the screenplay together, on the understanding that it was going to be something for me to direct. And it was sort of semi-science fiction-y, which is kind of my bent. And so I was very interested in that part of it as well, the techno sense of it all. But the truth is, we took it to Fox, and I kind of knew some of the people at Fox at that time, and we took it there, and they said, okay. But then, of course, you have to find a cast that will, that they will accept.
Yeah.
And that was a hunt, and so that got us delayed a little bit. But when we got Sam Waterston interested, and that did it.
And I think the center story of his wife is trapped and he's trying to get her. It's a very sort of traditional sort of strong story basis, isn't it, of needing to go in to rescue. It makes it very personal. You've got the sort of the bigger picture, and then you've got the human story.
Well, the human story is always the most important thing.
Yeah.
And so, yes, of course. And yet you have to have some sort of problem that has to be solved. In this case, reuniting them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the simplest story you can tell almost.
Well, I think the simplest are the best, aren't they? Because they're the ones that last the test the test of time. And I think watching warning signs, it doesn't really age that badly. I think it's still very, particularly with COVID, it's still quite a current sort of current story.
Well, that's a good point. Yes, COVID showed us what could really be happening.
Yeah. It almost sounds like there could easily be a sequel, possibly.
Well, I think reality is going to trump any fiction in this one.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. It does have a really great cast. I want to mention Yaphet Kotto, whether you remember working with Yaphet.
Yes. Well, Yaphet is a wonderful actor, a wonderful presence. He has a natural brooding, slightly impassive but dominating quality on screen, and just you feel like he's the soul of authority when you see him.
Yeah.
So and in terms of direction, he has a lot of inventive ideas of his own, and the less said, the better.
Right. I mean, do you think that you were inexperienced as a director? Was it intimidating a bit when you had these bigger names like G.W. Bailey and Yaphet? Was it a bit daunting as a first time director?
No, not at all.
No.
I'm not just a director, I'm also a writer. So, I knew what had to happen, and I had a very strong feeling about how I should take those characters and how they should work.
Yeah.
And Yaphet was wonderful. Yaphet's a bravura style actor, and as is G.W. Bailey. I had a wonderful time, especially with G.W., because of the fact that he is very expressive as an actor, and I like that. That's kind of my style. I want to have things be kind of loud. Yeah.
I think most people would recognize him from the Police Academy films, and so to see
well,
him.
When I cast him, I just thought he was terrific, but I didn't realize that he had this prior sort of history, and his fame was due to being Thaddeus in those movies. I had never seen them. And so he's doing a dramatic role in my movie, and it's not comedy at all, but he gave it that same emphasis, and I just thought that was terrific.
And again, I think his story as well is particularly captivating in the film, and he starts off as being this character where he wants the quarantine to be lifted, and you're not exactly sure of what's he going to, is he going to be a constructive or destructive role in the film. And then of course he becomes almost the protector and obviously a very tragic character as well. And I thought again that was a very good character journey.
Oh, thanks. Yes, he has a wonderful trajectory in the film, where he goes from being someone who thought he was in charge to someone who is just trying to make sure that Joni doesn't get ruined.
Yeah. Did you have to do an awful lot of research, I imagine, to make this film as seem very authentic? And I guess it is pretty much as it was in the 80s.
Yeah, we did. We did a lot of research and learned about all the actual biohazard problems in the world of biological research for war purposes, and so forth. And we learned quite a bit about the way in which laboratories work, the security around a P4 lab, or what was called a P4 lab in those days, where you're working with a pathogen which is really dangerous, and you have to be very, very careful about how it's handled. And we learned all that stuff. We had a consultant, a biological guy, a scientist, a guy named Neil Nathanson, who helped us out.
Oh, yeah. And you said you co-wrote the script with Matthew Robbins. Well, what kind of relationship do you have as writers? Do you kind of specialize in certain thing, or how does the collaborative work?
Well, you have to understand, Matthew and I are know each other since film school, so more than half a century, and he's one of my very best pals in my whole life, and still to this day, even though we don't write together anymore, we did write together for 15 years, and it's basically it's kind of like a three-legged race at a county fair. You know, it's awkward to work together, but we just did everything together in the same room. You know, it's just the writer's room kind of thing. And we would spend the mornings discussing our relations with Russia and China or whatever, you know, and then suddenly we'd have a few ideas, and we'd sit there and we'd craft a few pages of a screenplay during a day, and just constant discussion back and forth. And as we settled in on lines and the progress, we would write some stuff down. But in order, because we're a partnership, you have to be very organized in order to get anywhere. And so what we would do is the entire story took form on 3x5 physical 3x5 cards in those days, pinned up on a giant bulletin board. And there'd be about 100 cards to get you through 3 acts of a movie. And we did this repeatedly. And so we would have a very good idea of the structure of what we were going to do as we sat down and did the pages. Matthew still works the same way. Of course, the 3x5 cards are part of a computer program now.
Right. Yeah. And one thing that struck me was the opening. It's there's a great stillness to the film in the opening and the closing, you know, the credits sequences. What inspired you to sort of keep it? I suppose it's building the tension, was it, sort of having it rippling and, you know.
Now the contrast.
Yeah, the contrast.
The ordinary everyday world, and how serene it seems when under the hood something terrible is going on, and it's resolved.
And you know, I think again that's the realistic element, isn't it? It's the things we don't know, and then suddenly it's on the news, and you know, bubbles up from nowhere. The desert location, was that dictated by your original idea? Was that because of the stated budget of the film?
Well, we knew we were going to operate with a very limited budget, and that's of course my biggest regret of all of anything to do with this film. But it was understood that that's how we would do it, and no matter how much money I might have had, we still wanted to have the hothouse effect. Everything is trapped in a narrow and slightly anonymous interior. Where it's kind of bland, and you never really do see any very much of the so-called agricultural research. There are a few scenes where you can see corn growing, and that's about it. And other than that, you're running through corridors and trapped in rooms that are locked and so forth.
I suppose the opening shots of the agriculture and spraying the fields sort of is a juxtaposition to the claustrophobia that you later have in the film. But I think some really beautiful shots there, and of course the music by Craig Safan is, I think, really, really good.
One of my joys was the music that Craig did, and it's all synthesizer, very early days of synthesized music. But he had the idea of it not really being very musical, but being very dramatic. So he had this kind of synthesized boing, this explosive sound that we used to punctuate moments in the film, and I just thought it was terrific. And the brooding music that at the beginning is sort of something's going to happen kind of tension in that those opening kind of drone sounds that you get while the airplane is spraying the crops. I just thought that worked great. And of course, the crops are the everyday world, and that spray is a little hint about bad things to happen.
Yeah. And I thought it was very interesting, the cover story that Yaphet Kotto's character has, that it's a genetically modified crop, and of course, we hear that all the time, don't we? Not so much now, but certainly in the 90s and 2000s, it's very much sort of, so really hitting a big issue.
Well, whenever there's a serious threat, an existential threat to almost any place, but certainly in America, a lot of corners get cut on the liberties we think we enjoy. And that's certainly true of the Cold War, where we now learn there were all sorts of terrible things going on. And it happened again after 9/11 when the two towers got blown down.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the ongoing worries that you have is that whenever something like that happens again, there's going to be the same sort of terrible breaches in the social fabric.
Yeah, it doesn't take much for our freedoms to be encroached upon, and it's always said that it's necessary to keep us safe. Usually, that's the justification, isn't it? This is for our own good.
Right, but then suddenly there's a tissue of lies, and no wonder people are doubtful about government.
There's a clear lack of trust that the locals have for the authority figures. Yaphet Kotto's character in particular. Again, was that sort of mining perhaps certain the political atmosphere of America at that time?
No, I think that's just general human nature. We see the same thing again, where especially in America, it was really hard to get people to wear masks.
Yeah.
In the pandemic, people just when someone comes along and says you can't do things that you think you should be able to do, fury and rage ensue from that.
Yeah.
And that was the case with the Jerry Harden character, and who was trying to get in there and let's get our people out of there. And they just don't want to listen to the dire problem that exists. They just
I wanted to ask you about some of your favorite scenes from the film. Again, going back to the beginning of the film and the tension that's in the laboratory, and how very easily through just bad luck, the file is on the person's
on the tape.
Very good racking up the tension. And again, was that something that took a long time to sort of think, well, how we're going to release it in a way that's believable?
Well, I had to think up a way where you could, in a world where everyone in that room is going to be ultra conscious of security, and still a mistake is made. How could we do it? And so it took me a while, but then I cooked up that idea of the tape that was on the little analyzing machine that picked up the vial, and kicked it around the floor before it got smashed. That was a way of getting around what was otherwise an improbable moment.
Yeah.
The other improbable moment was that G.W. Bailey comes in with a Polaroid camera, and they take off their helmets. So I guess they thought it was secure, but I'm not sure in real life that would have ever happened. But you gotta, I had to get that infection to spread, and I thought I did a pretty reasonable job of the writing of it.
Oh yeah, I think it's completely believable that could happen, because if everybody's relaxed in whatever environment you are, sometimes that's when you make mistakes, isn't it? You forget about what can go wrong. So I think that is quite, again, a human nature element, I think.
Yes, I think that it is in accord with the fact that no matter what we do, we make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's just it's very hard to take on an enterprise and not have mistakes occur. It happens all the time. And so I felt that was at least realistic in the broadest sense.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about Jim Bloom's contribution as far as you were concerned. How important was Jim as the producer?
Yeah. Well, Jim put that project together, and among the other things he did, which were fantastic, is he found this school up in the hills north of Pasadena that had been closed by the LA school system, or the Pasadena or whatever. school system.
Hmm.
And we could rent that entire facility for very low money. And we could just have save an awful lot of money by not having much transportation around to various locations.
Hmm.
And once we're there, we just basically had our whole movie studio and everything. We did everything there. All the pre-production was done there. You know, the Henry Bumstead, the wonderful production designer I got the wonderful privilege of working with, and did a great job. You know, he just had his offices there while we were revving up to get going. Mm-hmm. And we shot everything there, except for a brief interval where we were out in Utah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And Jim put that together. And so, you know, he did a wonderful job. And I just wish that Jim had more money to play with.
Yeah. I mean, how long would you have had to shoot the film? Because it's quite a complex, there's quite complex sequences in the film.
Yeah, I believe I had 36 days.
Right.
And you know, it wasn't enough. There were many times in the film where if I wanted to get the material covered, I would have to figure out a way to do it in one shot. Hmm. And that happened repeatedly, where I just, okay, how am I going to do this? I have to do the establishing shots and all the coverage in one shot. Okay, how can I organize this? How can I block it, get it to work? Hmm. And it was a tremendous challenge for me. And that's some of the stuff that I'm the proudest of, is just being able to get that to happen. Hmm. And on the last day of the movie was all that stuff where Sam goes to see Jeff DeMunn and his where he's living now after having retired from the facility, and get him to come back and help him. And it's a little cabin that we designed, and it's meant to be up in the Utah hills somewhere, but in fact it was on the school grounds. And that was the last night of the shoot, and I shot 8 pages of dialogue, which on a feature film is an awful lot of stuff to get done in one day. Yeah. And of course, that wasn't done in one shot. There were lots of shots, but nevertheless, we just blew through that. Hmm. That was hard. And so I by the time it was over, I felt that I had my little wings, you know, for I'm a director.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, did a lot of your directing style and how you shot it, was it dictated by the time element, or were you one of those people that because you were writing it as well, did you give people very specific instructions, or was it more sort of let people develop their own thing with it?
No, we didn't do it exactly in sequence. And one of the things that we did, we organized it so that Jim will talk more about this than I will. But we organized it so that we would do the scenes where the makeup was normal. Hmm. And once we started putting makeup on people where they had sores on their face, you know, and stuff like that, which is tremendously time consuming, and it's hard to go back from that. So we kind of organize it in blocks in that way. Yeah. And so the day out of days was kind of in that order, but we didn't do everything in sequence. We would do stuff where we had to be outside, and that would be a block of time. And then whether we were outside in any particular moment in the story was different. So it was just the usual Hollywood kind of organization where you want to minimize the amount of time. You can't, you know, be inside one day and outside the next day if you're going to, and then go back and then back out again. You want to do everything in that exterior at one go, and so we did that. But aside from that, it was pretty simple, because the story proceeds kind of in those blocks. Once the makeup goes on, you're in a different phase of the story. So yeah.
There's quite a lot of stunt work in the film as well. Again, how was it directing the stunts and, you know, the fire effects? Was that a bit nerve-wracking?
Well, that was a lot of fun. I had a wonderful guy as a stunt coordinator, a guy named Bobby Bass, who is this ultra jock guy who's a Green Beret kind of guy from the past, and a judo champion guy who became a stunt man. And it opened up when you were around Bobby, you just get exposed to the edge of the mafia world, and you get exposed to just this whole world of physicality you never even thought about. And he was a terrific stunt guy. Now, in addition to that, there's the stunt guys who were just fantastic to work with. And some of the stuff that was the most fun for me And the most interesting wasn't the big physical stunts, but for example, eventually the guys that are going to get sick find Joni and attack her, and they just use an electrical cord to shock her and everything. Well, the actor, who was a wonderful guy, actually, Keith Sarabaika, who was the leader of this group, this little group of dissidents, it was very hard for him to hold Kathleen in the frame of the film that I was trying to get. So we had one of the guys who was on his little team of dissidents was a stunt guy. And that guy was just, put her right here. And you know, and when we're shooting, and she just was in the right part of the frame every single time, because that guy knew exactly how to hold her there. So that was a stunt. And it was a stunt that just, you know, made my work.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that is quite a harrowing scene, isn't it? And sort of a sign of I think what was quite good that it didn't linger on the violence. It wasn't sort of violence for violence sake. It didn't become voyeuristic or anything like that. It was
not really a horror movie. It's more like a thriller and a drama, really. But some of the most interesting stunt stuff was done just by the actors. You know, Rick Rossovich has to go tumbling down, and Cynthia Carl had to go fly, you know, drop down and skid underneath the door that's coming down. And Kathleen is running, and she just a fantastic athlete, Kathleen Quinlan, and she would just do the falls. You know, she would just trip herself and fall just beautifully. Yeah. And so there's no stunt work there.
And I think again, Kathleen's Quinlan's relationship with Sam as well was did it take a long time to find that pairing of your leads, or was it quite an easy thing?
No, it's a story which takes place under enormous tension. And the result of that is that, you know, you don't have to worry very much about the intricacies or the subtleties of human behavior. You know, these people are apart from each other. Their lives are threatened, and that's enough to get whatever the chemistry might be there to feel like it's working. You know, I felt. And basically, we just wanted Sam to be this cop that was a little too intellectual to be a cop all his life. And so we decided, when we got Sam, instead of a beefier guy to be the lead, we did do a little bit of writing that made it work for him. So that, for example, he's studying to become a lawyer, and you know, and that's something we wouldn't have done if we had cast a different kind of a hero for the story, some guy who was more of a jock himself.
Yeah.
And Kathleen is just someone that I wanted in the movie, because I just was taken by her very short performance she did in American Graffiti, where I first saw her, and I just thought that one scene was she's Joe College strikes out. I just thought, okay, she's great, and I just had a great pleasure working with her.
You mentioned the constraints of budget and also time. Was there much that didn't make it to screen? Things you had to cut for various reasons?
No, that's all there.
Okay. So what are some of your favorite moments in the film? Are there particular moments or scenes that you're particularly proud of?
Well, I am always like the beginning, when once the vial has been broken, and the Richard Dysart, you know, warns Joni to shut this place down. That whole beginning of, you know, the regime, the protocols taking over their lives. I just love that whole way in which the place is buttoned down. Thought that was really good. And I just thought that I loved the whole way in which Jeff DeMunn and Sam, you know, get themselves into the building by going down the chute through the corn stuff. And I just love the way in which G.W. Bailey, his career goes from being this guy to get us out of here to just, you know, he's sick, and you get him, and she gets him down to P4, but then he dies. And I love the idea that we came up with of the disease being detectable by fluorescent light.
Yes. Mm.
And in general, I guess my favorite parts of the story is just the overall story. I just love telling that story on film.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's a very strong story, as we've already alluded to. What was there? What was particularly the biggest challenge in terms of directing or scene? Was it the more emotional stuff, perhaps?
No, no, the challenge was just getting the work done. The challenge was doing that. Now, I knew that it was going to be tough. So without exactly knowing how I was going to make use, I just realized that I'm going to have two cameras.
Mm.
And it was a way for me to make sure I would get coverage when it bothered Dean Cundy, who's a wonderful guy that we picked to be the DP, and he was just terrific. And he had a bit of a reputation among people I knew as being someone who could be very helpful to a director. And that was certainly true for Dean. He's just great. And so I had to negotiate with Dean about, if I've got two cameras and he's lighting a scene to be seen kind of from here, okay, how far can I push that camera over there before I wreck your lighting? And so that was a little bit tricky. But I found out, again, I had shot a few days worth of stuff, and I go down to the editing room, also in that school, where Bob Lawrence was cutting stuff, and he put together a just kind of a fairly sloppy and quick assembly of some stuff that I had already shot. And I realized that anything I did was going to be cuttable, that Bob could turn it into a movie. And so I then was very confident about using that second camera. We did a lot of coverage where the establishing shot and the coverage is almost on the same axis. You just punch to the coverage. And so that was something I learned. But in addition to that, we eventually got ourselves in scheduling trouble, and I was able to have two locations where I would take camera A and I'd be shooting a scene. And while Dean is setting that scene up, I'm running downstairs to another set, and where I've got the B camera and the B and an operator. The operator would go back and forth with me, and we'd go down there and I would do pickups from a scene that I couldn't get at all the first day.
Yeah.
And so that just turned out to be fantastic. And if I hadn't have decided early that I wanted, without really quite figuring out how I'm going to do it and what I'm going to make use of, that having two cameras, I just turned out to exploit them to the limit. It was great. I would never, if I were doing it again, I would never do it any other way. I've got to have two cameras all the time.
And you said lighting is very important to any film, but particularly when you're being very atmospheric and the almost the horror elements of it, but no more so perhaps than the sequences of in the tunnel when the army guys are ambushed by the
maniacs.
Yes, yeah. Again, was that did a lot of time go into designing something like that, for example?
Well, it's always tricky, and the tricky part is that you want it to be dark, because that's where you're going to have the scary stuff. At the same time, you have to see the actors.
Yeah.
So there's a fine line to be tread there, and Dean, I thought, did it just pretty well, except that eventually the movie, which was a failure at the box office, as you well know, came out on videotape. And in those days, directors were not required to be consulted on lighting for the stuff, and kind of quality control people who did that videotape just thought, well, you can't have this be dark. It's got to be bright. Otherwise, people will think there's a mistake. And so all the scary dark scenes got just erased by having everything be broad daylight. And luckily, eventually, a company, Anchor Bay, got interested in making a DVD. And they were very, very helpful to me. They relit. They turned all those bright scenes back into night scenes, which is the way the movie was, which is really good. But okay, here's a lighting challenge. Yaphet Kotto is a black guy, and he's a very black guy. Sam Waterston is a white guy, and he's a very white guy. And they're in a trailer when Sam and Yaphet are having a scene together, and you have to get both their faces to look good. That is really tough. And that meant, you know, I had to be very careful how I'm going to shoot that, because if I'm not careful, one of the two, either Sam is going to blow out and be totally white, or Yaphet's just going to be shadows. And so Dean would figure out how to put the two lights on, and I would have to make sure that my coverage didn't move around too much from what we had sort of negotiated. And it was challenged, but it was fun. That was cool. But that's really kind of hard to do.
Oh yeah. You mentioned Yaphet Kotto had a lot of ideas to bring to the table. Did he do much? Did he improvise much at all? Was it?
Not really. He just, you know, added actors' touches to stuff that there's a sentence on the page, and that's one thing. And then when it comes out of the mouth of a very powerful presence on screen, it's totally different. Yeah. And you know, he just had a way of being cocky that I hadn't really thought of, and I just love that.
I think at the beginning, when he when they know it's getting worse, he says to Sam, I see you're brought up religious, and he said, or maybe you should have a There's a smile he does that I think is very Kotto.
Yeah, he you know from the subtleties of his performance that he's lying. It's great. Yeah, it's great. He's just mouthing the words that when everybody got together and the various authorities and consultants decided on protocols for how to handle a situation like this, he's just mouthing those ideas. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So it went directly to video on its release. Was it originally going to be a theatrical?
It was released theatrically. It just didn't succeed, so it didn't stay in theaters very long.
Right. Yeah.
And then it had a tawdry life on videotape, and now it's got Anchor Bay's DVD is very nice. I did a watch along on that, a commentary.
Yeah.
And more recently, a place called the Shout Factory did a 4K Blu-ray.
Oh, right.
And they pulled my commentary over, and also I did and Jim and I both did little interviews for that Blu-ray release. They're both very nice. They look good. If you're going to see that movie, one or the other is the way to see it.
Oh yeah, because I think here in the UK, you can buy it digitally off Amazon, which is what I did. But you can't buy it physically yet. But I assume they'll release is it coming out on 4K or?
Yeah, it's 4K. Yeah. And I'm not sure what was the source of material you got, but it must have been the DVD at least. So
I got it in high definition, so it looked pretty good.
Yeah. Of course, my DVDs are just the same resolution as regular old-fashioned television, but at the same time, there's all these clever chips that do upsampling. Yeah. So it looks great at the high def.
So why do you think the film didn't connect with audiences at the time? Would the marketing have been a factor?
Yes, I blame Fox for having total indifference. They didn't. Once we got the movie in kind of preview form for the studio, they just said, "Well, this is terrible. We don't want to do it." Right. And so they decided to actually release it in the hopes that maybe it would catch on, but then they didn't do almost any marketing whatsoever.
Because I think the trailer sort of suggests that it's more sort of a horror film rather than a drama thriller, and maybe they didn't quite know how to. Sometimes they don't know necessarily what to do with certain films.
I agree. Yep. I think that they were interested in other things. It was a low budget movie. I think that the people who were in charge just decided this isn't really going to work.
Hmm.
And but at the same time, they didn't go so far as to just run it off to direct to tape.
Yeah, because you do hear horror stories where studios take over and they cut the film without the director's permission and all sorts of. So you were at least spared things of that nature.
They let it go. They let it go out. They weren't, they weren't risking a lot of money. So it's not like this was a tentpole film that that had to work, or there would be heads would roll. This wasn't one of those things.
Yeah. And was it with the DVD release that you found that suddenly people were starting to be interested in the film again, and people were starting to approach you about it?
Well, here you are, and so I guess there is some interest in the film, but you could fool me.
But that must be quite gratifying to have your work kind of recognized, although not so much at the time, but now.
Well, I have to say, it was a tough experience for me, and I was interested in other things. I was leaving the movie business and heading into another love of mine.
Yeah.
And where I spent actually more time and my wife than I did in making movies. And so I haven't thought about the movie very much at all until the Anchor Bay people came along. And after that, I eventually looked at it again, and I decided I liked it well enough.
Yeah. I mean, if you could do it over again, would it be drastically different or do you think that the nuts and bolts of it are there?
It'd be more money involved.
More money.
It would be, yeah. And of course, there's an old saying that, you learn 90% of everything you'll ever learn about directing on your first film. And that's probably true. But of course, given that basis, and I thought during the course of that film, I did learn an awful lot, and I thought I knew what I was doing. And so I feel pretty good about that part. And I'm just sure that I would be much more sophisticated on another project.
Did you think the fact that you had little money to play with meant that you had to focus more on the characters rather than, say, the action? Do you think that the low budget might have helped in that respect?
Yeah, I do. I think that sometimes the restrictions you're under squeeze out of you creative impulses that are effective. And I agree. I think that was it was actually something I hoped for. I knew that I was not going to have the ability to have, for example, a lot of extras or a lot of stunt stuff or a lot of action, which might just, destroy parts of sets and stuff like that. I just wouldn't. So I did think that, okay, this is the kind of movie where people are desperate and you can just focus on them and it'll work. And I thought it did.
Oh yeah, I agree entirely. Yeah. The one person that we did mention briefly was Richard Dysart. Do you remember working with Richard, and what was he like as an actor?
Richard is wonderful. Very famous TV actor. And I thought he was very, very good as a slightly suspect guy, in terms of his character, someone you don't really quite trust, and someone with a wholehearted ambition to perfect this biowarfare disease, which was really pernicious. It not only killed people, it made you crazy. And there are real diseases that do that. And so, Borna is an example of an animal disease, which, as we now know from the pandemic, diseases can cross species. And so he was busy trying to make that happen, and he was doing it wholeheartedly. And so we wanted him to be ever so slightly oily and so forth. But he's quite different to work with from the other actors. He's very technical, very planned. All the takes would be very similar. He had a way of, we would talk about what to do, and he could just do it again and again. And it was really interesting. Whereas most of the actors, each take is, quite different.
So I suppose did he enjoy playing the before and after, so infected, and it must have been quite nice to just suddenly, as an actor, hammer it up and just go for it, sort of thing.
Yes, the truth is that when you're watching the movie, you're watching someone who is, spiraling down into into the cesspool, but on the set, everyone's having fun.
Hmm.
So yes, he enjoyed that transition enormously.
Hmm. So it's quite a happy, giggly set, it sounds, because of course it must seem a bit ridiculous while you're making it. Of course, the final effect is fantastic, but it sounds like it's one of those environments where it was, a lot of fun.
Well, it was, and there were just a few places where I sort of worry. There were some places where we just didn't have the money or the time to get stuff to really work, and there were a few places where thank God for Bob Lawrence's scissors, and he was able to make things work even when they almost didn't.
So was there anything that because you say you had to shoot it in a certain order because of the prosthetics and the sets and things, was there anything that were you worried that I'll miss something and I'll need to go back, because I assume you wouldn't have any money to have gone back? And
well, as I mentioned before, we were able to sort of get 2 sets going for some of this coverage that I really needed to do that was desperate.
Yeah.
But there's one moment which we never did recover from, really, and it's in a dark corridor, and Joni is pulling G.W. Bailey along. He's very ill, and she's struggling to get down this corridor, and she's confronted by Richard Dysart and Kavi Raz, the 2 guys that are crazy and sick. And to get by them, she grabs a fire extinguisher and hits them with it. And it just didn't really work at all. It was like pie in the face. And so it was comedy. And we had to get by that really fast.
Yeah.
And editing.
I wanted to mention the full body suits. So they put the 2 people that get out the building, they put them in this sort of like a bubble sort of suit. So was that again based upon research, or was some of it artistic?
Yes. Yeah, but it was also the idea of turning it into a journalistic spectacle. The journalism here, we have a real problem. As conceived in the story, we have this desperate situation going on, and journalists turn it into something that you can put on TV for 5 minutes, and in a way, we were just kind of satirizing a little bit the fatuous nature of journalism.
Yeah. I mean, would you get looking at the problems of today, and of course in the 80s it was a real concern of germ warfare. Do you think that we're kind of moving away from that in terms of its potential usage, or do you think it's kind of always going to be that kind of threat?
I think it's less of a worry right now in terms of the exceptionally weird technological advances of warfare, and instead I think that it's World War II all over again. That's what we have to worry about, but I do think that overall it's less of a worry than it was then. That was pretty scary. Period of time. We came close. Now the history books are being written, and you find out that we were very close on 2 or 3 occasions to actually having an atomic warfare. And who knows what might have happened biologically. But biological warfare is a little bit like gas warfare. It almost is worse for the people who are doing the attack than the people who are being attacked. And that's one reason why gas warfare faded away. It wasn't just because of the inhumanity of it all. It was because you would launch these gas canisters in World War I, and the gas would come back over your own troops. So that's a problem that's also true about any kind of biological warfare. I'm not sure we have to worry about it very much. The world is a dangerous place still, and I worry every day that something terrible is going to befall. But at the same time, I'm confident that humans will persevere.
Well, we're still here after so much.
Yeah.
To destroy ourselves, and you do wonder a little bit with the threat of nuclear weapons and more countries having nuclear weapons, whether they'll turn to biological or chemical as a sort of, what will the superpowers allow you to do, and it's like with Ukraine and Russia, isn't it? How far can they go before it ends?
Well, I just think that it really helps to some degree that there's a lot of publicity about it, and that it makes it means that these ideas don't just hide in the background and in a room full of generals somewhere. And I think that's really important, that the information is out there and that the worries are widespread, so that so political action can tamp things down a little bit.
Oh yeah. I wanted to mention the Blue Harvest in joke, which I assumed Jim Bloom put in there, the Blue Harvest Project, which of course was a reference to the working title for Return of the Jedi. Again, was that you were, oh yes, we'll have that. You quite game with that idea?
It was just the tip of the hat.
Yeah, it's a nice because having spoken to Jim before, of course, we discussed Blue Harvest, so I
exactly
jumped down at me. I just wanted to know, because you mentioned that you started, you were in animation. That was what you wanted to do. What made you want to go to film school? Were you a big film fan as a kid? How did your interest start?
Well, I grew up in a little town in the east coast of the United States, in New Hampshire, and a town called Hanover, home of Dartmouth College. And my father ran the local movie theater. And because it's a college town, we weren't just, I was not exposed just to, cheap Westerns. My father ran all sorts of different kinds of movies, and I got to see an awful lot of this stuff when I was a kid, and I became very interested in film because of that. But when I was in college, I learned, to my astonishment, I got very interested in making animated movies while I was in college. And I learned, to my astonishment, that there were actual film schools where you could go and study up and get into the business. So I applied to graduate school at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles and got in there. And so that was wonderful. And it fulfilled a couple of dreams. First of all, it allowed me to pursue my interest in movies. And in that case, pursue animation even further. But even deeper than that, in 1955, Disneyland was near to opening. And National Geographic magazine, a magazine my family subscribed to, did a multiple-page color feature on Disneyland and its finishing and its construction. And I just devoured that article and all those pictures over and over again. And so at the age of 15, I knew that I wanted to go to California. And the reason is that I grew up in the East Coast in a fairly dour society where people are workaday people, and the imagination is not something that figures largely in people's thoughts. And I thought, wow, out in California, your dreams become concrete and imagination becomes part of the real world. And I just wanted to be part of that world. So that's kind of the background of it all. And then once I was at USC, and there were not too many other people very interested in animation, I started to look around and see other possibilities as well. And in those days, now, if I were doing this again, I probably would have just become an animator, because now, with the advent of especially Toy Story, which was the first of the three-dimensional animated movies, it became a gigantic hit. But in 1966 or 7, animation was dying. Disney's movies were not especially successful anymore. And they kind of ran out of ideas of what to do, and they needed new blood. And so there were just very few opportunities as an animator. And Matthew and I, who weren't writing together at that point, but we would go have lunch together and we'd talk about, story ideas endlessly. And eventually, we just discovered an agent who wanted to take on young clients and develop them. And so suddenly, hey, there's this opportunity to be a writer instead of an animator. And so Matthew and I wrote 7 screenplays before we got one made. And so, you know, and that was a tremendous learning experience. We suddenly learned how to be writers.
Yeah, yeah.
How to tell a story.
I must mention Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Do you remember much about that experience?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's, Matthew and I did a lot of uncredited work on that movie. A lot. I'll just give you the broad headline would be that the character of the small boy Barry is an invention of us. The whole idea of Devil's Tower, and that the whole mashed potato scene, and his obsession with trying to reconstruct this iconic totemic sort of place where the aliens are going to land. That's all stuff that Matthew and I did. And you know, and we actually are in the movie. Toward the end, Matthew and I both get off the ship. You know, there were Flight 19 guys coming back, and although we're uncredited, you know, I put my kids through college on the money we made from that movie, so that's pretty good.
Very good.
And I love the movie. I love Steve's work, and it's not only Steve's idea, kind of science fiction, but it's Matthew's and my ideas too, which is science fiction that takes place in the context of the real world.
Yes, yeah, yes. It's more and more cerebral as well than say Star Wars or Star Trek. You know, it's.
Although I love that movie too. So
yeah,
those movies, you know.
Was Steven Spielberg very good in terms of the writing process? Was he very knew what he wanted, sort of thing?
Well, yes. Steve is himself a talented writer, but that's not something he does usually. And originally, when he had the idea for Close Encounters, he hired another writer, and he wound up with a kind of a very serious version, and kind of a grim version of Men in Black kind of thing, where you have these you know, secret agents running around doing stuff, and it wasn't to his taste.
Yeah.
And Steve is a warm-hearted, sentimental kind of guy, and that wasn't the sort of film that he wanted to make. And so he wrote a version himself. And hey Hal, hey Matt, you know, take a look at this and see what you think. And we liked it. We thought, hey, this is great. And we started, you know, giving him suggestions. And he said, get down here. And he brought us down to LA. We were living in Northern California at that time. Yeah. So we went down and spent a week or so in LA, and we sort of polished up his story. But basically, it's Steve with some help from us.
Oh, lovely. And we've come to the end of our hour, unfortunately, but do you have any final closing thoughts or remarks about Warning Sign you'd like to make?
Not really. I value the privilege of working with such talented people while I was doing that movie. And I just loved everybody, and it's a uplifting experience to do serious work among solid professionals who are good at what they do. It's a wonderful experience to do work like that. And that's in very serious contrast to the world of video games, which when I was very active was just crazy. And so, you know, and I've been through both. So I look at that and I like it, but I'm glad I did it. And I don't feel bad about having stepped away after that.
Yeah. And just one thing that I liked about the film I didn't mention before was that you killed off Bob's character, and there's the realization of his girlfriend that he's dead at the end of the film, and you have this sort of the relief that's over. So you have a sort of and not an upbeat ending, because of course it's quite a tragic story, but you have the relief, the tragedy, and also the look of the government's going to do this again, aren't they? Sort of that sort of, we've won today, but what will tomorrow bring? So again, that's something you took a long time to reach to.
I thought we needed to have a moment where you recognize that although the main characters are going to live through this experience, that there's a lot of tragedy that surrounds them. You need a moment to have a moment of sobriety.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really good piece of work, very understated as so much great work it is, and yeah, I very much enjoyed watching it again and talking to you this evening.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for staying up.
Yeah, yes, it's been great fun. So yeah, I'll speak to Jim in a few days, and it'll go on my YouTube channel, and I think people will lap it up.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hal. Much appreciated.
Okay, bye now.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye. Nice to meet you.
So thank you, Jim, for joining me to discuss Warning Sign. It is very much appreciated.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to begin by asking how you came aboard the project, first of all, and what were your initial thoughts on it?
You know, I came aboard because I had been working on Return of the Jedi, and Hal and his partner, writing partner, Matthew Robbins, were going to do another movie called The Grid, which was a great science fiction film that we set up and we worked on for a year, and unfortunately it fell apart. That's like another story. This was back in 1982, 83.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried to put it together for a whole year, a great movie, and it didn't quite happen. And during the interim, while we were doing a lot of the design work, Hal was writing Warning Sign. Right. You know, predominantly, you know, along with Matthew, but mostly Hal doing most of the work. And when this other movie, The Grid, fell apart, which would have been a great movie, still might be a great movie, very much, you know, it almost seemed like that when the Terminator came out, they borrowed a lot of ideas that we had written in The Grid. You know, as if I'm forgetting his name. He had read the screenplay, and but you know, anyway. So Hal had written Warning Sign, and we were able to get it set up at 20th Century Fox. And with The Grid not going and me working as a producer with the two of them, Hal came to me and, you know, asked me if I would produce, you know, Warning Sign, which originally had a different title. It was called Biohazard. I think you talked about that a little bit, but another film came out before us, which was not part of the studio system of the, I forget what it is, the AMPAS or something. So we decided to put a new title on it. And the new title that we came up with was Warning Sign, which was probably not the best title. I think we could have come up with some better, you know, better titles for the movie, unfortunately, but we all decided on that because the nice thing about the Biohazard title was that it had the biohazard symbol. I don't know if do you know that? If you know, you can probably get a copy of that symbol somewhere. It's the symbol that's on the poster, and it's the you know, now it's far more recognizable than it was back in 1982. So that's how I came onto the project. I think I started in late 80 in 83, 84. You know, probably early 84 is when I started on the project. Something like that. And then, you know, we prepared it for a number of weeks, and Fox was the studio involved. And we went down to LA, and it seemed to make sense to shoot the picture locally, which we did. I think it was the summer of the Olympics, the Los Angeles Olympics. And everybody was so worried about all the traffic in LA. And so something that we did and that I encouraged and we made happen was that we didn't want to shoot on the lot because it would be too expensive, and they were trying to have us do a lower budget movie. And I had known from, you know, earlier movies that I'd worked on and whatnot, that when you're doing a certain kind of picture where you need sort of an institutional facility, and in this case it was a laboratory in Utah, but it was all interiors. So we found an empty junior high school about 45 minutes to an hour outside of LA, maybe an hour from the studio. Or as I used to say back then, just far enough that the studio executives wouldn't want to drive back and forth to come visit us, which they never did. So it worked out perfectly. So we went to this junior high school, and what was great about the junior high is that you had all of these, you know, rooms, you know, and all this electricity, everything that you needed to kind of put a little, you know, mini movie studio in and build and do whatever you want. So, you know, every department had their own classroom. And we went down to the gymnasium, and that was where we built, you know, the big laboratory set was built in the gym, because it had, you know, it was like a little soundstage. You know, it wasn't soundproof, but it had high ceilings. It was quite big, and, you know, structures on top to hang lights from if you needed to, and, you know, easy to, you know, construct a laboratory set on the floor of the gymnasium. So the gym became our interior, you know, P4 lab that we used in the movie.
Yeah.
So it worked out very well. So we actually started, I think we started the movie, I'm trying to remember where we started. Yeah, we started on location in Utah to get the location work out of the way, and then moved back to Los Angeles and shot the rest of the film at this junior high school. I think we may have had a day or two here or there in other places. It's hard for me to remember right now, but, you know, mostly just those two locations. And when we went to Utah to work, we found an empty warehouse, which was perfect to be the exterior look of biotech agronomics, which I think was the name of the facility, you know, the big facade for what the government was doing with germ warfare. Yeah. And the thing that made it so interesting to me is that when the pandemic hit in you know, late 2019, 2020, I mean, it was just remarkable that here we were, you know, close to 36, 37 years later from when we made the movie, and everything that people were talking about is all the stuff that we had discussed and explored in the making of the movie. You know, this idea of which, you know, all of the, you know, kind of subversive, you know, conspiracy theories. Oh, they developed a germ warfare in a laboratory in Wuhan, China, to release to the world, and it got out. You know, I mean, it's, you know, all that BS that was going on at the time. And but that there was this particularly virulent virus that escaped, and they had no antidote for. You know, so that was really quite interesting the way and then you began to see the biohazard symbol everywhere. And it, you know, I tried when the virus came out to get the folks who controlled the movie at that point, because Fox had been sold to Disney. So Disney owned the movie. Wow. And to get them to re-release it, but I couldn't strike up any interest, you know, in getting them to do it. They, you know, the idea was that, you know, Warning Signs, it's an interesting movie. Some people love it and some people don't like it at all. And we sort of, I don't know if Hal talked about this, but we sort of got dumped on when the movie was released. Did he go into that? Yeah, we sort of became a bastard child at the studio. The studio executive who greenlit the movie was a man named Joe Wazan, and that would have been like in the spring of '84. And then, like a week before we started production, he was fired, and a whole new group came in to run Fox. And the fellow who took over as president of the studio was quite a good movie producer named Larry Gordon. And we were a week away from production, and he kind of like shrugged his shoulders like, well, you know, no reason to stop this movie. Go make your film, go make a good movie, you know, because it was a previous regime's film. And we were so far along that it, you know, it just didn't make sense to, you know, to have killed it would have been, you know, you would have been having spent, you know, 25 to 30% of the cost of the movie for nothing. And his feeling was, well, let's just finish it, because it wasn't that much from their point of view as a production budget. I think we made the movie for 7 to 8 million, something like that. Yeah. Which was not a huge budget for a studio picture, you know, so it was still on the cheap side for a studio LA full union motion picture. And, you know, with a really good cast and whatnot, and really, really good technical people. I don't know if Hal talked much about that when he was with you, but we had a great technical group as far as director of photography, production designer, editor, you know, sound designer, you know, like those key people that you want to surround a director with. you know, it was incumbent on me to try and give Hal, as a first-time director, as many wonderful people to help him make the movie, to make it look as good as possible. So the director of photography was Dean Cundy, who had worked with Bob Zemeckis on a lot of the Back to the Future movies and other films. The production designer was a man named Henry Bumstead, who worked with Hitchcock and George Roy Hill and all these other, you know, just a really top-notch A-flight production designer. The editor was a man named Bob Lawrence, who'd worked with Kubrick on Spartacus. And our sound designer, because I had appreciated from my experience, and Hal and Matthew too from theirs, how important sound design is to a movie, because it just adds this whole other dimension that people always don't recognize because it's not visual and on the screen, but it fills the background up when you're in the theater. We hired Alan Splett, who had worked on Amadeus, and I think had won an Academy Award. So we had all these like Academy Award winning technical people on the show with us, which was great. And then we had a great cast. You know, I mean, looking back on it, you know, maybe we could have cast somebody other than Sam Waterston. You know, it's kind of, you don't really think of Sam as a, you know, rough, tough, you know, country sheriff. But you know, Hal rewrote it so it would play for Sam, and he did a good job. And Kathleen Quinlan, who played his wife, she's just absolutely marvelous. She's really a great actress, and it's one of those careers that always surprised me that never really took off. I'm not, you know, that's sort of the mercurial nature of the movie business. Why some actors and actresses and other people have great careers and others don't. You just never know which way the pinball is going to land when you drop it in the machine and, you know, pull the little lever back and let it fly. But she's a wonderful actress. I mean, you know, she did such great work on The Doors and really wonderful work on Apollo 13 and, you know, other movies. And I had met her years earlier because she had worked on American Graffiti.
Yes.
As a young actress in a very, very small part. But she was just great in Warning Sign, you know, the heroine in distress. She was just wonderful. And, you know, I still love watching the movie just to watch her performance. She was so good. And then we had Yaphet Kotto, who was great.
Oh, yes,
you know, really, you know, Yaphet was just wonderful as the government guy. And G.W. Bailey, who, you know, was the guy who, you know, the Typhoid Mary character who, you know, puts his contact back in and becomes the one who spreads the virus all over the facility. And then I'm Richard Dicehart, who played, you know, the doctor. You know, anyway, it was a really good movie. And I think in many ways, when you look back on it, you know, I mean, I like to think this about a lot of the things that I worked on during my career, is that it was years ahead of itself, not only in its ideas and everything else. It was one of kind of the early zombie movies, in a sense. You know, the only big zombie movie that I can think of before that was, you know, the George Romero picture. You know, I'm forgetting the name of that one right now too, but you think you know which one I'm talking about? You know, Night of the Living Dead.
Yes.
Yeah, that one, which was, you know, a huge hit. And this was sort of that, you know, kind of that genre of people, you know, but different though. You know, people get sick, you think they're dead, and then they come back awake, and, you know, and the ingenuity of the virus was that it, you know, you don't have to kill your enemy, they kill themselves. You know, they kill each other. So if you infect the enemy, it's like, just get out of the way. But the problem was you need an antidote so that you don't get sick, and that's what they hadn't found just yet. And then, so Sam and Kathleen, and the third actor, Jeffrey DeMunn, was also wonderful, who played the disaffected scientist biologist who had left the lab, who they had to track down to go back to help break inside again, and, you know, all of that. And yeah, I think it's a really good movie, and it's like a roller coaster. You know, it's a rocket ride. You turn it on, you watch it, and it just whoosh, off you go. And it just, like, you know, goes on for, you know, 90 to 120 minutes, and it doesn't stop from start to finish. It doesn't slow down, and it just keeps carrying. And the other nice thing about it is that it really sort of touches on the the good and the bad of human nature. You know, what do people do in these kind of situations? Because you've got this, I think, a wonderful setup of people on the inside wanting to get out and escape, people on the outside wanting to get in, and they can't get in. And the government's not telling anybody what's happening until, you know, Sam finds out about it, you know, and realizes that when they say we're going to let it run its course, it means they're going to let everybody, you know, on the inside die. And then they're going to do this big sweep up. So from a story point of view, I thought it was great. So I was always hoping the picture would do better business. I had, met, I mean, I'll try to remember, you know, all these names from years and years ago. Richard, it was a great reviewer for Time Magazine, and I'll think of his name in a minute. But I set up a screening for him to see the movie, and he liked the movie. He really enjoyed it. So we got some good critical reviews of the picture. But by the time the movie came out, what happens with movies like this, if the studio isn't heads over heels about it, if they're not crazy in love with it, you become a bastard child at the studio, and they have no incentive to spend a lot of money releasing your picture, and more importantly, advertising and publicizing it. Because if it fails, it becomes a black mark on their you know, slate of movies. And it's much easier for them to go, not mine, I didn't greenlight it, had nothing to do with it, it failed, we're doing better and newer stuff. So, you know, it's part of the Hollywood ego. So I really tried my best to, you know, discourage them from that, but they didn't. They dumped the picture, you know, back then in the 80s, anytime you release a movie in what they call the dog days of August, which is like the first or second weekend in August, when you know, the sun doesn't go down till 9 or 10 o'clock at night and people aren't rushing off to the movies to see things, you know, you're like, you know, you're getting shunted aside. And not only that, they spend less than $1 million advertising it. They, you know, they decided to kind of roll it out to see how it would do. And there was very little response because they really did nothing to keep it in theaters. But to this day, people who have seen it like it. You know, I've spoken to people who go, yeah, this is a fun movie. You know, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So, but anyway, we got dumped on after Larry Gordon took over. Then they hired, it was a great crew of guys. It was, you know, all well-known Hollywood names, Barry Diller. They three of them came in to run the studio. Barry Diller, Larry Marks, and I'm forgetting the third name. He's a famous producer who got in trouble last year for having an awful temper. And he's like a New York theater producer, movie producer. I'll remember his name before the interview's over. But those three guys came in, and I couldn't get any of them to get interested in the film. So we just sort of got dumped. And that was the end. But since then, there's a DVD group out of Portland who came back, and they released a Blu-ray DVD of the movie with commentary from Hal and me, which people have responded to very nicely. And Amazon, where you can rent it, it's got, you know, like 4 stars or something from all the reviews that come in, that people really enjoy it. So I thought it would be, you know, boy, what a great pandemic movie. You know, people started expressing, you know, all this interest in seeing these other sort of pandemic films. There was the Soderbergh movie that came out. There was the other, was that Crisis? And then there was Crisis. What was Soderbergh movie called? I can't think. Yeah, but with a wonderful, great cast.
I know the one you mean, but I can't quite think off the top of my head. Yeah.
And there was and then there was another one called Crisis in the Hot Zone, which starred Dustin Hoffman, and, you know, or as they say, you know, if you know, sure, give us an extra $20 million and, you know, a star name like Dustin Hoffman to sell a picture, you know, you get a successful movie on your hands. And Crisis in the Hot Zone was very similar to ours. It happened years later, and it was about an accident in a lab, you know, and what happens because it started to leak out, and what they had to do to stop it. So anyway, I thought the picture would do really well during the pandemic because these other movies were picking up interest through their rentals and through streaming. But I couldn't. Hulu Hulu had warning sign, and I couldn't get them interested. They said, well, we don't know how to go out and market a movie that's 30 years old, and it's like, well, think about it, and then I called the head of Amazon, who I knew, and tried to get him interested, and he showed it to his group, and I couldn't get them interested in either. They thought it was just very difficult to try and do anything there just wasn't enough interest in money out, marketing effort going in that they'd have to pay to promote it to what they thought they could make off of it. So not much happened. So, I'm happy to now but the pandemic's kind of winding down at this point, I hope, although I still wear a mask when I go out in crowded places, it keeps changing. So it was a fun movie to make. We had a good time with it. And I think that Hal wrote with Matthew a great script, and he really did a wonderful job. I did a good job directing it. It's a well-directed movie, but it just didn't get the play that I thought it deserved, unfortunately.
What you're describing with the studio sort of dumping the film, a change of regime, that seems to be very similar to what's happening with DC at the moment, and all the changes in firing actors left, right, and centre, bringing on new people. New people don't like this. They've canned the other stuff. It seems a bit sort of a theme that Hollywood tends to sort of go through, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. Unfortunately, I think that what's happening now with Warner Brothers in DC is that, the big mistake was that AT&T years ago came in and bought Warner Brothers. And then they moved it into streaming, and then AT&T realized that Warner Brothers, I don't know why they ever got into that business. The phone business and the movie business are like, somebody thought there was some sort of synergy there, but all the movie people were like rolling their eyes like, this is stupid. And it turned out years later that it was stupid. And then they went and spun it off into Discovery, which I don't completely get now, but we'll see what happens. And Discovery came in, and you took, what was, we'll see how this turns out. My quick brief on it is, I don't know why Discovery is running Warner Brothers. They're in the, kind of TV Discovery Channel reality mode. What are they? And Warner Brothers was for many years sort of considered the Cadillac of the movie studios, the Rolls Royce of the movie studios. They always made some of the best pictures with the best filmmakers and the best actors and actresses. And it was always considered such a, top of the flight when it came down to productions. And now that they're, with Discovery, it's all changing. They've laid off thousands of people. But the movie business is radically changing right now, from a theatrical business to a streaming business. The whole business setup is very different than it used to be. I don't think have you been to a theater lately to see a film?
There doesn't seem to be that many films coming out at the moment. That's the other thing. I want to go, but you have a look at listings, and they bought it, especially cinemas in the UK over the last year or so. They've just re-released lots of classic films. You get an occasional new film, but it tends to be sort of, there's not many blockbusters. There's not many good, interesting small films. So I don't think there may be the appetite to go back to the cinema, but I don't think there's the product currently coming out. I think that's an element of it as well. But you're right. Lots of films I'm watching streaming because they've of course decreased the window, haven't they, from cinematic release to streaming, which I don't think particularly helps, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, moving into a difficult financial time. Coming out of the pandemic, and then potentially short term later moving into a recessive environment like we are here in the States, and I know you guys are over in the UK.
Yeah,
it's very difficult to go out and spend. You want to go to the movies. It's very expensive. It's two people, it's popcorn, it's parking, it's maybe a babysitter or something, and all of a sudden you're out to go to a movie and it costs $75, and for $75 you can get a year of HBO
Yep.
you know, non-advertising streaming, and just, you know, get yourself a big TV, which you probably already had during the pandemic, and watch your stuff at home.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a lot more comfortable, unless it's a big event movie, you know, that you really want to go see in a theater, like, you know, a Star Wars or an Avatar, or, you know, something like that. It's just that, you know, but it'll be interesting. You know, a lot of the theater businesses are struggling, you know,
Yeah.
closing down, closing theaters. You know, it's a big struggle here in the States to keep these theaters open. It's real estate, it's, you know, property, it's rent. And, you know, people have gotten used to the streaming environment. It's like, what do I want to go to the theater for? So I can, you know, sit next to somebody who's, you know, eating a taco, and I'm smelling Mexican food the whole time I'm watching the, you know, not that I don't like the smell of Mexican food, but, you know, maybe not when I'm in the movie theater. You know, when I'm at a restaurant, it's fine. But, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I also think that the films are made perhaps for too much money these days, particularly the blockbusters.
Yeah.
There just seems to be a sense we'll make it for 200 million, but they expect it to make $1 billion, and there seems to be a disparity between what they're making it for, what they realistically think the film should make to be a success, and what the actual market reality of what you can make.
Well, I think that they're you know, that they're finding, and this is, you know, you can blame it on Star Wars, you know, from years ago and stuff, is that, you know, they're finding that that's the whole idea behind the Marvel universe. You know, you're dealing with pre-marketed characters, and that's where a lot of the big money is in movies. You know, they're like the event films. I'm not a Marvel fan. You know,
I'm more of a DC person, really, but
yeah, and DC will be the next. You know, we'll see what Warner Brothers can do with the whole DC, you know, venture. But that's where you know, the young. It's like, who's your movie going audience? You know, who's and it's this younger, probably male skewed audience to go out and drive box office to make successful pictures, to, you know, and then they do well in the streaming environments. And then each of the studios now has their own streaming thing. The thing that's interesting about Warner Brothers is just lately they've been putting some of their product out on other streaming venues, so that you can see older Warner's products on Hulu or on Amazon. So, I mean, which I thought eventually would happen, which is that if you've got a product and you've got a different avenue to release it on, why not do it? And that's what they're doing. You know, you don't necessarily have to make it, you know, a closed system where you can only see it on, you know, HBO Max. Particularly if it's been out for a while, why not put it somewhere else? So I think that the earlier Lord of the Rings stuff is going out on other streaming groups right now, too. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how it all, you know, I don't think it'll just keep moving in that direction is what'll happen. So,
so I suppose you kind of need budgets to sort of go down a bit to counteract the fact that
sometimes it's hard to do that, you know, depending on, you know, these big Marvel movies are so visual effects laden. And visual effects is, you know, it's not super cheap. It takes, you know, you watch the credits on these pictures and you can see how many hundreds and hundreds of people, you know, work on these movies. And it's, you know, everybody thought it would get cheaper, but it's not that cheap. And a lot of the visual effects has all been shipped out of the United States now, and a lot of it's being done in the UK. There's a very robust business in the UK. There's, you know, the Weta shop down in New Zealand, and a lot of work is being done in Canada too. But a lot of that has to do with tax breaks and whatnot.
Oh yeah. Look, a lot of films are made in Australia now, aren't they? The Marvels,
absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
Breaks and things of that nature. And I know. I think DC's particular failing. I think they compared themselves a bit too much to Marvel. So when they made Batman versus Superman, for example, they expected it to make $1 billion plus. But actually, it was only the second in the series. They had a Batman that was Ben Affleck was a big star, but never did Batman before. So you sort of got all these things that would suggest 700-800 million, which is kind of what it made. But there is a sort of, you know, almost like a bit like politicians, sometimes out of touch with reality and what things actually should do. And
Right.
So whether that's part of it, whether some of the failure comes from that poor expectations and planning, and I'm not sure really. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you find that it's changed a bit in terms of who's in charge of the studios? In respect, are they perhaps less film people and more business people nowadays, as opposed to, say, in the 80s?
I'm not, because I haven't made a movie in a few years now, it's hard for me to react to that. I only can sort of surmise on what I read in the newspapers and magazines and hear on the news. But my sense is that, they've tried to introduce as much technology as possible and marketing stuff into, which they always were trying to do sometimes before, into the making of the movies. And, I think that has had, effect on the kind of films that are being made. They're trying to somehow create, algorithms that will tell them how a film will do based on the story and the potential marketing based on how other pictures of a like nature have done in the past. Yeah. And that's never been I've always objected to that, because the thing that makes, new movies exciting is that they're new and you're doing something that people haven't seen before. And that's why they get interesting. And, falling back on, kind of tired old themes, motifs, stories doesn't work. You need to do new and interesting things. And oftentimes it's the new and interesting stuff that take people by surprise.
Oh yeah.
And, create huge blockbuster hits, or taking a story idea and, putting a new spin on it. I'm as I kind of ease into retirement, I don't pay as much attention as I used to on like the box office numbers on how pictures are doing.
Yeah.
So, and the pandemic really kind of put a stop to everything. So now a lot of the new Lucasfilm stuff coming out of Disney is all coming out of streaming. I don't even know you might know better than me what the next Star Wars movie is supposed to be. That gets released theatrically? I just know there are all these TV shows coming out.
It's all TV shows, Mandalorian and
Andor and yeah.
I don't know. I think maybe it's just less money, less risk, but people are eating the content up. So per dollar spent, it's a better return.
Well, it also attracts a lot of subscription to Disney Plus, which is important. That's how they make their money. They can sell more money by all these families who are getting subscriptions, and then it gives them more to see and to watch and everything else. Yeah. I guess the Indiana Jones is probably Paramount movie because they had the first one. So we'll see where that goes. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens as it goes forward. I know I personally, I have a bunch of subscriptions. I subscribe to Netflix, I subscribe to Hulu, I subscribe to Apple Plus, and I subscribe to Disney Plus. But I'm not necessarily adverse to, churning. Like if there's nothing happening on one of them, I'll give it up for a while until something comes back. I had Apple Plus and I gave it up and then went back. I had Disney Plus and I gave it up, and then I went back when the ILM documentary came out because I wanted to see that documentary. So I think I think a lot of people probably do that, because they're trying to, be smart about where they're spending their money. You can only, I think that people can only watch so much TV, a day, although it's probably quite a bit of it.
So, There's so much content you can absorb, and I think TV production has changed dramatically, and it's now movie quality, isn't it? So there's no real difference.
Absolutely, the TV stuff has gotten much better. There's been great work that's been done. A lot of the TV shows are really excellent, and you've got like a longer form way of doing it, and this whole idea of binging has taken hold. That people love it. They love to watch 2 or 3 episodes at the same time. Sit down and watch 2 or 3 hours, or go through a season in 4 or 5 days. That's completely changed the viewing habit. And the other nice thing about the streaming stuff, from my point of view, is that you don't have to watch advertising.
But that's the other thing, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, I have a real hard time when I'm watching TV and it's an older movie and I'm not streaming it, but I'm just watching it on a broadcast channel, and it's oh God, another 3 minutes of TV commercials. It's like, give me a break, and you can't, obviously there's a way around that. You just record it and then zip through the commercials. But it's still not the same thing as being able to watch it as it is when you're streaming, on Netflix. I mean, the one thing I will say for HBO that I wish they did on some of the other streaming channels is let the credits roll. HBO does that. They're very, very good about watching, but that's me. I like to see the credits. I don't always want to be pushed immediately into the next offering.
Yeah.
I'd like to say, oh, who, because oftentimes I know people or not, but am attracted to certain certain technical credits where I think they've excelled and done a good job.
Oh yeah. It'd be interesting what happens with Indiana Jones, because of course it's going to be a Disney picture, because Disney of course bought Indiana Jones along with Star Wars from
is that right? Oh, I didn't know that. I guess then they own that. They didn't have to go back. Oh, so it will be. Well, that's good for Indiana Jones.
Oh yeah,
that's great.
Absolutely.
Disney's great. We can get back to Warning Sign if you want. We kind of.
Oh yeah, it was. I was good to sort of segue back to it, and because we were saying that we're pretty much living in the sequel to Warning Signs with the pandemic, and there's almost a sense you could make another film, but I think when I'm talking with Hal, it almost seems that the real life has overtaken the fiction in this. So whether or not people would kind of sort of want to see something about something they've just lived 3 years through, I'm not sure if they would want to do it.
Well, I think that's a good point. Well, but that's why I thought because Warning Sign is sort of this combination. It's this psychological horror film, that is a little bit about a potential, germ warfare and a potential pandemic. That's why I thought people would have found it interesting as a re-release to go back and watch it, because the science is still applicable. In the sense of, they're still dealing with the same germ warfare in the same labs around the world. Bio warfare is still a big concern amongst the big countries, and it's something that they're keeping an eye on all the time, and we're lucky that there hasn't been any kind of problem, because it was going, that's where Hal got the idea. It was all going on back in the 1980s, and here we are 40 years later. And you think that, yes, it all could have, advanced even further. So, that's why I like it. So I hope lots of viewers watch your show, Philip, and they'll go out and rent the movie on Amazon.
I'm sure they will, because in the UK, you can stream via Amazon. We haven't got the DVD or Blu-ray, unfortunately, but we have.
Oh,
got
you don't? Really?
On stream. Yeah.
They didn't do a European version when they did the re-release?
Not that's come to the UK. It might have gone to, say, Germany and a few other European countries, but it hasn't come to the UK yet, physically at least. So, but the print on Amazon is very good. It looks it's a very good.
So you rented it on Amazon? Is that what you did and streamed it?
Yeah. I streamed it. Yeah.
And you look good, huh? So you liked it, huh?
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic, because Hal was saying that when it was first released on home video, they changed the cinematography of it in terms of the lighting, and they made all the dark scenes brighter because they thought it looked better on people's home TVs. So he was quite horrified. In fact, all the subtleties and everything had just, all the atmospheres had kind of just disappeared. So so it was only the more recent DVD and Blu-ray that has restored it to how it should have looked in the cinema.
Oh, great. Great.
I mean, do you find that you get people ask you about Warning Signs a bit more than? Do you think there's a resurgence in its popularity, or is it something?
No, I don't. No, I don't. Unfortunately, I wish I tried. I wish I did, but I couldn't. People don't talk about it too often. I think it's just because people don't know about it. It's just a question of how and I guess I could have done, it's just interesting, is like, how do you get the word out about a movie? And I think a lot of it now is all through social media, and that means, I tried to get some people at the New York Times interested and never heard back from them. And I just didn't, I just decided to, not pursue a big effort, to try, because it would have meant doing my research to find out who are the big social media kind of science fiction horror movie, voices on, Instagram and Facebook and things of that nature, who I would have to try and get interested in watching the movie again, and then having them say something about it. You need to find some of these people who have, 1 million followers, and then they just have to put a blurb out, and then all of a sudden you've got 50,000 people running the movie.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. But I just didn't. With my, I didn't pursue that. Nor would I want to, go out and, and hire some social media, PR people to help me influence that effort. It just wasn't. As they say, I didn't have any skin in the game any longer. Where it was, really worthwhile. Other than, I think people would enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm very happy to come and do shows like yours and talk about it. Because I hadn't, until they did the Blu-ray. It had been many years, and they did the Blu-ray like in 2014 or maybe 16, 17. I forget when it came out. And I hadn't seen it in like 20 years. And I watched it and I went, oh, this is fun. Sometimes you work on a movie and it can, be good or difficult or whatever. And then you remember so many different things about it. But then when you see it again, you can actually kind of watch it as a movie, as opposed to watching it like, oh, I was behind the camera right that day, or I remember what happened that day, or I remember the problems we had this day. So it's fun to go back years later and just like watch it as a movie, just as a regular audience member, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I sort of enjoyed that. And I always, love the performances. I was, just crazy about the performance that Jeff DeMunn and Kathleen and, Sam gave, and G.W. Bailey and all these people.
Sorry, Jim.
No, well, the film has a good sense of humor and humanity about it.
Yeah, it does.
And it kind of like sucks you in when you're watching it.
Yeah.
So it's a fun little, rocket ride for a couple hours. And the technical credits are great. It looks good. I always say to people when you watch it, it's like, turn out the lights and turn up the sound. And grab a bucket of popcorn and go enjoy it. Because it's that kind of a film. But you really need to turn the volume up to hear what a good job that Alan Splett, who was the sound designer, did with the background. With the echoing and the water dripping and stuff like that. When you get into like the bowels of the laboratory, when these guys are crawling around and stuff, and they really did a good job.
I think I was struck when I saw the film, because I wasn't really aware of it until we had talked about it previously, just sort of mentioned it among your credits. And I think one thing that Hal said was that one perhaps reasons why it didn't succeed was that it wasn't perhaps marketed correctly, in the sense that the studio didn't really know what it was. Watching the trailer, it seems like they wanted to suggest it was a horror film, when actually it's more of a suspense thriller. And I think people who didn't want to go see a horror film would have, I'm not a horror person, so if I'd sort of scrolled through on Amazon seeing warning signs in the trailer, I would have thought, not for me. But once you actually give it a go,
right? No, it's not really a horror. It is a suspense thriller. And that was really the way to try and sell it. And a psychological thriller, because it's one of the things that's very interesting after it, the sort of that in the end of the second act, beginning of the third act, is that you don't know if people are infected or not. You're not sure. Are they okay? It's like, Joni, let me in, Joni. Joni, let me in. When they're talking to her to open up the security, to open up all the doors, and she's locked inside her. And then the other thing I really loved is why, it's like, it's the life force is the reason why she doesn't get sick. It's like, she's pregnant. Craig, you know what I mean? It's like this great little surprise in the film. It's got, you know, all these sort of positive, uplifting notes about it. You know, the life triumphs over death, that she's got this, you know, because she's pregnant, it's protecting her, you know, and then they have to create the antidote from her blood and give it to everybody to make everybody better, you know, which was great. You know, the other funny thing, they gave you know, Sam Waterston, the sheriff, a limp because he had polio. This was a nice thing that Hal wrote in as a kid. So, you know what, he's got a phobia for germs.
Yes,
You know,
that's good.
and here he is. What does he have to do? He's got to break into this lab where there's nothing but germs everywhere. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's very well constructed. It's very. It has really well written characters. It's got the love story. It's got all kinds of different layers going on to it, and yeah,
it's a very well constructed, tight movie.
Yeah.
You know, which makes it quite good.
Yeah.
You know, I think. You know, Hal and I, we used to, you know, talk. I often wish there was a little bit less horror and more psychological thrill. You know, maybe a little bit less with the makeup.
Yeah.
But you know, it still works. It still works like gangbusters. I think it works great. You know, I just wish more people would see it. I think, you know, for you know, it's worth the price of admission these days for, you know, a $3 rental.
Oh,
you know,
yes,
whatever it costs on Amazon these days. I haven't looked lately.
Yeah, I think about $3.99 or something like that.
Right. And it's still, I think, you know, I haven't looked lately, but it had, you know, like, you know, 4 or 5 stars or something. People who have seen it really enjoyed it.
I think it's, 5 stars.
5? Oh, really? It's got 5 now, huh?
Yeah, it's 5.
Well,
yeah.
I guess I've been adding more stars every day, Philip. I'm joking.
Yeah.
I've been putting in more good reviews every day. No, it's not. I wouldn't do that. You know, oh, that's good to know. It's 5 stars.
Yeah, I think I'd say people give it a chance, people discover it, and
they're
really fond of it, and particularly the performances, like, I mean, Yaphet Kotto, of course.
Oh yeah, Yaphet.
Bailey, you know, fantastic.
Poor Yaphet. Yaphet had such trouble with his dialogue. He had such trouble learning his lines, you know, but he's really a wonderful guy. Great actor too. He was really great.
So it was the more technical stuff he kind of sort of.
Yeah, it was hard for him. He used to pull cue cards up behind the camera. But he's a very warm, you know, lovely man, you know, a good human being. And I really enjoyed Yaphet very much, you know, and a good actor. He was great on screen. He was just, you know, just great. He had a very commanding presence.
Yeah.
So.
He brings a good level of he almost sometimes you see him not believing the lies he's telling the locals, and you can see he's aware himself of how absurd it is, and so he's kind of plays around with the, you know, what's on the page, and like any good actor sort of brings himself to it. And of course G.W. Bailey, very much known, I think, for the Police Academy films, so more sort of comedy rather than because I don't think Hal was really aware of his comedic sort of you know fame, but to have him in a straight role that is very much sort of a very heartbreaking story as well, as him as the protector of course succumbing to the so they're all a brilliant cast. Do you remember much about G.W. Bailey?
No, I agree. He was very, and I remember I enjoyed his performance. You know, he's this, you know, very happy-go-lucky, you know, laboratory manager, you know, zooming around the building, checking in on people, you know, happy for the new discovery that they make and whatnot. And, you know, I think it's just great that he becomes the vehicle that releases the virus into the rest of the building. You know, the one that you don't suspect to ever do it. So
yeah.
And, you know, the thing that I like about it, which is, you know, probably true of us, and, you know, it's a pretty diverse cast of people, you know, which is really nice. And, you know, you know, I mean, it was something that we all were aware of and thought about back in, you know, the 1980s and stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, it was something that I was always aware of, having lived in Berkeley, and is that you've got to bring some diversity to the movies that you're making somehow, which we tried to do and succeeded at in some form, some
I suppose
small
it was. I suppose it was a very diverse film. Nowadays, of course, films are very much constructed in being very diverse, and there's lots of
Right.
conscious effort. But I suppose
Yeah.
back then it was less so, but nevertheless, you end up with just, I suppose, getting the best people, and by that
Right.
extension, it could be quite a diverse
Yeah.
talent, really.
Well, and to give the films a little, like real life variety too.
Oh, yeah, they should
Right.
depict the societies in which, the people we see when we walk down the street should be kind of what we see on film. It shouldn't just be this sort of,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
You had known Hal and Matthew Robbins before, hadn't you? I think you worked on Corvette Summer, is that right?
Well, I met Hal and his partner Matthew on Close Encounters because
yeah.
they did some uncredited script work, and that's where I met them for the first time. And then if you go back and look at Close Encounters, they're the first two who walk off the mothership in the Box Canyon. So when the aliens land and the doors open and all of the abductees from years past walk down the ramp, into the canyon floor, the first two are World War II like pilots played by Hal and Matthew.
Yeah.
They're the first two who come off. So and after Close Encounters was 1976. It came out. Yeah, we shot in 76, came out in 77. And in 77, Hal and Matthew wrote Corvette Summer with Mark Hamill and Annie Potts. And Annie went on to become a very successful TV actress. And they called me up and asked me to be their first assistant director. So it was great for me. I was very young at the time. I was 24. I was one of the youngest first ADs in the Directors Guild. And it was a great opportunity for me to move from having been a second assistant director to becoming a first assistant director. So I worked with them on Corvette Summer. And then after that, I worked on Invasion of the Body Snatchers with Phil Kaufman, and then went to work on Empire and Jedi. And when Empire, and I'd stayed close with Hal and Matthew because we became friends, and they lived up in the Bay Area, outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, where we all live now. Hal now lives in Portland, but Matthew lives about 10 minutes away from me, out near Point Reyes Station. And he and I talk all the time.
Fantastic.
And so that's how I met them years ago, and have been friendly with them since.
Oh, that's wonderful. Because I think they've both done Dragon Slayer, I think, together quite.
Yes.
We've just leading up to Warning Signs, so they must be quite recognised in the industry, and probably helped them to make Warning Signs.
I think they're re-releasing Dragon Slayer as in a new DVD version or something, and
I think there's a special 4K, I believe.
I think that I remember Matthew saying that he went down to do some work or do some interviews, or their a new sort of post-production, coloring on the movie and cleaning it up. I think it's coming out. I think the Dragon Slayer's always had quite a following, and in retrospect, with all the Game of Thrones dragon stuff going on right now, if you look at Dragon Slayer and you look at the dragons in Game of Thrones, there are a lot of similarities to the two dragons that they were using, which is great. Although it's funny, I keep telling Matthew to watch Game of Thrones and he hasn't seen it yet. I think he'd love the dragons.
He probably would, yeah. Particularly House of Dragons, which of course is even more sort of about the house, obviously the House of Dragons. So that's got a lot of dragons in it. I want to mention the Blue Harvest project, which is in the film. That's obviously that was your one of your contributions to the film.
You mean in Warning Sign or in?
Yes, because the actual project, it's called the Blue Harvest Project, is what they're actually.
Is that right? Well, I think I must. Is that right? because we didn't use
Yeah.
Blue Harvest until we went to that was on Empire, on Return of the Jedi. Was the
Jedi,
Blue,
yeah,
is that what you're talking
83.
about?
Yes, but 83 was with the obviously the fake title for Return of the Jedi. So 84 was Warning Signs, and the
Okay,
when
we
in the
used
labs
it.
at the beginning.
Oh, is that right? Was it I think we probably just borrowed it as an idea and just as a like a joke between movies or something, you know.
I thought it was rather good, yeah.
I'd have to watch.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that. So it was called. So the work that they were doing in the laboratory, it was called the Blue Harvest Project. That was
Blue
just
Harvest
like
Project,
you
yeah.
know, it was
Yeah.
a joke between the two movies, is what it was. Because when we were making Jedi, it became very apparent to me, because we were shooting in the United States, that we couldn't go out and say that we were making, you know, the third Star Wars movies, because all of a sudden the prices would triple.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had to come up with I said, I need to come up with another title for this movie that's incredibly boring.
Hmm.
You know, I have to think of the most boring title I can come up with. And I thought, oh, well, how about Blue Harvest? Horror
Yeah.
beyond, you know, it's like a horror movie. It's like, well, it doesn't sound like a horror movie, does it? I mean, if you wanted a horror movie, you'd probably call it like something like Blood Harvest, or, you know, Red Harvest, or, but it
Yeah.
was like Blue Harvest. It was like, you know, what could be more boring than you know, with like farming and with blue? It's like the two things, like, it's like they don't even like fit together. And so that's why we came up with the title of Blue Harvest. I had forgotten that we had used borrowed Blue Harvest again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Warning sign. Oh, is that what it's called? It's called the Blue Harvest Project. Is that
Yeah.
what they're
Yeah.
working on down in the laboratory where the germ warfare is? Oh well, that we
That's
just,
right,
you know,
yeah.
it was one of those homages to a false title from Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
You know, I probably said, oh, let's just call it Blue Harvest. We used it, you know, you know, we all probably giggled about it and used it in the movie.
Yeah. So it's not something you've ever used in other projects. It was probably just because it was such a close time
No,
frame wise. It was probably more fresh in the mind.
no,
But
never used it again. I think because when we were making, well, when did Jedi? Well, Jedi came out in '83,
yeah.
and Warning Sign came out in '85. So, and it wasn't like a name that was ever, you know, copyrighted or anything like that.
No.
It was just a title, the Blue Harvest Project.
Mm.
That's funny. You reminded me of that. I'll have to go back and look at it. Did they talk about it, or are there signs, or what? How did
It's actually in the dialogue. In the dialogue, I don't think there's any signs or anything that says Blue Harvest, but it is in the dialogue. It's referred to as
Right.
Blue Harvest
Yeah,
Project.
one of the other funny things in Warning Sign is that one of the doctors, the is Dr. Tippett, who is named after
Phil Tippett.
Phil Tippett, because Phil worked
Yeah.
on Dragon Slayer and did all the dragon work, and he was a big, Hal and Matthew were big fans of Phil, you know, and his artistry and stop motion work that he did on Dragon Slayer. So they decided to name one of the evil doctors after Dr. Tippett. Yeah, so that was something else that they did.
Are you quite surprised how much life Blue Harvest has had with things like Family Guy, and you know how people know it so much now?
Well, I think, you know, yes, sort of. It's funny. It sort of, you know, I guess it developed a life on its own years and years later. I mean, Family Guy didn't come out. What did they do in Family Guy? Did they do? I forget. I should watch that episode and see. I don't think I'm not something that I recall.
They did some very lovely homages to the original Star Wars films, and basically they do all three of the original Star Wars films, and
the
scenario is that they have a power cut and they've got to go back to old-fashioned, tell a story together, and so Peter tells the story of each Star Wars film, and I think when they come to Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, they call it Blue Harvest, or there's a strong Blue Harvest connection in terms of the three stories that they
really?
tell. So I have to go back and look at it exactly what it is, but I think they sort of brought
pretty strong. Oh, that's interesting. Well, you know, it's funny. The Star Wars movies are just so popular, especially the first three. Everybody talks about how they're, you know, all their favorites, and they're mine too. You know, I mean, I was flipping through the channels like last weekend, and is it the last Skywalker or the Last Jedi? Which is the third one of the last trilogy?
It's the Rise of Skywalker.
With the Rise of Skywalker?
Rise of Skywalker, yeah.
And I was watching on TV, and I'm always immediately kind of like taken in, because to me it's like, oh, it's like, high school reunion. Go take a look, because I know the characters, I know the people, I know the stories, and it's always fun to see, R2 and C3PO and Chewie and Luke and Leia, and and I'm crazy. I think Daisy Ridley is wonderful.
She is.
I think she's just great. Just love seeing her. And but there's something about the stories it makes me angry, and anyway, I don't want to go into it, but it just, the thing about Rise of the Skywalker is that there's no time in the movie to breathe.
It's pretty full on, isn't it?
Huh?
Yeah, it is pretty full on, isn't it?
Yeah, I was watching it the other day, and everything is it's just like, it's just like I felt like I needed to take a breath.
Yes.
And
yeah.
now, I'll admit, when you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's kind of breathless too, but it's breathless in a good way. But I didn't find that. And anyway, I need to go back and watch it again and see, but it was just so. And then some of the other Star Wars movies, it's like, been there, done that, but it's just like, I said to somebody, oh my God, it's like too many planets, too many creatures.
Too many Death Stars.
It's just like my eyes are going wah 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 wah. With all these planets, all these creatures. It's just like, slow down. Tell a story. But maybe somebody will say, "Oh, you're just an old fart. You're 70 years old, and you can't keep up anymore." But I don't think that's it. But it's just
no. I'd agree with you that there is something different that the new ones have that the originals had, did better. And I think there's a problem with originality, because there's been 9 Star Wars films, and I think we've had Death Stars in 4 of them. So there's been or 5, I think.
Probably, yeah, right. Yeah, probably 5. There was a Death Star in each of the. Wasn't there a Death Star in Star Wars? Not in Empire, but in Jedi. Yeah.
And in the Force Awakens, there was essentially a Starkiller base type Death Star sort of thing. And then the Rise of Skywalker has Death Star technology on the Star Destroyers. So there is certain, and I think even episode, of the prequels, there's certain things that seem to be quite formulaic. If you look at the new trilogy, Force Awakens is loosely a remake of New Hope. Last Jedi is Empire. Rise is Return of the Jedi. They even remade them in order in some respects. So, but they're still great films. But I think what I like, you said about the importance of sound design, is how the original sounds of Star Wars have followed through all 9 films.
Oh, the hell, that's nice. Yeah.
The Falcon and all this different sort of explosions and lasers.
Right.
It does have that origin in the 70s, which I think is really important. And I've spoken to quite a few sound people about those films, because, like you, I recognise the importance of to sell a film. You need those good it needs to sound as you imagine it should, if that makes sense.
Have you ever spoken to Ben Burtt?
I haven't. I would love to, but I don't know how to get hold of him, unfortunately.
You should send a note to him at Lucasfilm. At Skywalker Sound.
Oh, I'll try and do that. Yeah. So I've spoken a few times to a guy called Norman Wanstall, who won the Oscar for Goldfinger. He did quite a few of the Bond films, and I've always been very interested in sound design.
Oh, Ben's a lovely guy.
I'll let you know how I get on with that one.
Tell me how you do with that when you reach out to him, if you get a response or not. Okay.
Yeah, we'll do. Just any other questions I had to finish off. Sure. I mean, was there any sort of? It must have been quite nice making a small film, because, as you say, executives weren't there like maybe they were for Return of the Jedi, so you could kind of sort of do a bit more what you wanted. So was it a very pleasant shooting experience because of that?
Yes, it's always nice to make a smaller movie. Because you're not there's something nice about stories that are a little bit more intimate and contained, and you know, it doesn't blow your brain up. You know, the thing about the Star Wars movies is that they're just huge, and they're complicated, and they're on 2 continents, and you've got hundreds of people working, you know, hundreds in the UK, hundreds in the US, hundreds in visual effects, you know, massive numbers, difficult schedules, big budgets, you know, all of those things. And yeah, so it is nicer to do you know, a smaller, you know, it's nice to do both. You know, there are different challenges in each one. But yeah, no, I enjoyed very much working on Warning Sign. And it was really a pleasure for me because it was my first picture as the producer, you know, whereas on the other movies, I was a co-producer or associate producer. And on Warning Sign, I think I shared a producing credit with Hal. As I think I'd have to, I forget. Maybe not. Maybe I was just the sole producer. I think I was. Anyway, doesn't matter.
I think you were.
Yeah. So that was very, and it was also, you know, it was a great experience for me, you know, to be the one dealing with the studio. You know, I mean, you know, producing a movie is very interesting. There, you know, there are really 3 parts to it. I learned quite a bit. You know, you've got to pre-produce the movie, you've got to produce the movie, and you've got to go out and sell the movie. And each, you know, selling, marketing, advertising, publicizing, distributing the movie, they're all equally important to the success of the film. You know, and unfortunately, where this one fell apart was in that aspect of it, because the studio, you know, the studio didn't care. You know, we were, you know, we couldn't care. And, you know, I mean, I'll tell you another quick funny story because it's interesting, because it's all about genetic engineering and agrigenetics and crops and stuff. Is that I got the studio to send me to Washington, D.C., and I tried really hard to get to publicize the movie in Washington, D.C. with National Public Radio, which in the U.S. is a well-regarded news source. And I actually hired a consultant named Jeremy Rifkin, who later went on to become the great sort of mouthpiece against genetic engineering. But he worked on the movie, and he helped me put together a screening where we invited lots of local Washington, D.C. press who we thought would be interested in the movie from the point of view of germ warfare and genetic engineering. And the leaders in genetic engineering back then was a company called Monsanto, who have since changed their name, but they were the first ones who were involved in genetically engineered corn, where they owned the seed. And it's just an awful situation, because the problem is that the seed kind of wipes out the natural corn crops. And supposedly if the seed blows from one field onto another field that doesn't have it, you have to owe them for their seed that blew onto your field, because now you're growing corn with their genetically modified, that, you know, GMO, you know, you probably see stuff that says non-GMO. You know, the GMO is genetically modified organism, and Monsanto was just getting into this, and they were facing a lot of negative press. And 3 of their executives showed up in black suits and white shirts and dark ties to watch the movie, because they were very scared that the movie was going to have a negative effect on what they were trying to do with GMO corn at the time. So it was just funny that they showed up to watch. They heard about it, you know, they wanted to come see the movie, because they had to develop what, I guess they came to see it just in case it were to be very successful, to develop their, you know, anti-movie strategy to protect their business of GMO corn. So, you know, that was one thing, but
I think what's great about the film
problem.
I think what's great about the film is that how scientifically accurate it is, because again, Hal was very keen to get scientific advisors, and so it was all kind of how you would lock down a place like that, etc.
Yeah, we had this great biogeneticist from UCLA who became our advisor, who was on the cutting edge of a lot of this gene splicing work that was going on back in the early to mid 1980s. Yeah, he's a great guy. Helped us with the laboratory and everything else, and all the technical information and what was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that Neil Nathanson? Neil Nathanson, well, Hal said there was a guy called Neil who was one of the scientific advisors. So whether he was
yes, that
main,
could I'd have to see the picture again to see his name in the movie. It could have been.
Yeah.
No.
And I think one of the interesting things was you were saying about people didn't really necessarily know the biohazard sign back in the 80s, and the trailer that I saw, which is again on the Amazon, you watch the trailer before you watch the film, and whether of course the trailers were different for different markets, but the trailer does begin with going through what each hazard symbol is, and
yes,
when
right.
you get to the biohazard, this is the one you don't want to see. It's
right. Yeah,
the most deadly one. So
did you like that?
I thought that was very, very good.
Oh, you did? Oh, good.
Yeah, I think it was quite a good trailer, actually. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, I'm going to tell my brother you said that. My brother ran a trailer company in Los Angeles back when we were making the movie, and we were able to hire his trailer company to make the trailer.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think it's very good. I think it does sort of sell the whole element rather than the other elements. But of course, as a trailer, you've got to. It's difficult to kind of give the whole picture, isn't it? But I thought it was very.
These are the symbols, yes. Radioactivity, electricity. This is the one you don't want to see. The klaxons go off, and then you cut to the movie of people running around and stuff going wrong. And
yeah,
it was pretty good. I'm glad you liked it. That's great. I'll call him and tell him. He'll get a kick out of that.
Yeah, please do. One other thing that Hal really liked was the music. He said that the music.
He did like the music. Okay, really good. I'm glad he liked it. That's great.
It was Craig Safan that did the music, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I actually went to school with Craig's younger brother at Berkeley.
Oh, right.
And so when Craig came to us, I knew his family and stuff, and his brother was wanted to go into the movie business and filmmaking, but didn't. But Craig became a pretty relatively successful music composer and a lovely guy, and he did some very nice work on it. And his between his work and Alan Splett's work, the two things complemented each other quite well.
And would you been on the set quite a lot for this one? Would you have been quite in the day-to-day sort of sense of it?
Me, I was there every day, every day, every hour, every minute. I was there all the time. Yeah, because that's part of how I do my work.
So the more action side of it, and when you get into all the makeup and the fire effects, that must have been quite fun. Those sort of parts.
Yeah, it was quite good. We had a really wonderful makeup crew. I'm forgetting Eddie Vasquez, and I'm Yolanda Evans, I think was her name. And they were the ones, and they then later became very successful makeup team on other movies, other horror movies and other films where there were great prosthetics and stuff added. But Eddie came up with those little scars that when the people got sick that we applied to their faces and stuff. And a few fire gags, and we worked with some stunt people who I had worked with before who were very good. I think somebody got set on fire. We did a fire gag, and something.
Yeah.
I forget who it was who we set on fire.
Well, I know the stunt coordinator was a guy called Bobby Bass.
Bobby, one of the great stunt coordinators. If you look up his credits, he's worked on lots and lots of wonderful movies. He was really great. I had worked with him on, 5 or 6 different movies before that. I worked with them on Corvette Summer, on Bound for Glory, on Coming Home, on a Bob Altman movie called Thieves Like Us. Not always as the coordinator, but oftentimes as a stuntman. And he was a great guy. He's a really wonderful guy. The stuntmen are such characters. They're really special people.
They're great. And again, I've spoken to a lot of stunt coordinators, stuntmen doing these interviews, and
cool.
really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
really hard work. Very hard, very dangerous. Got to be very careful. They've all got broken bones and injuries, and
Yeah.
it's pretty tough stuff.
And it's surprisingly unrecognised by the film, the Oscars. There isn't a stunt award, is there? There's very few stunt awards.
I was just talking to my brother is a governor on the Motion Picture Academy, and I was just talking to him a couple of weeks ago that there should be a stunt category.
They should,
I think that one of the problems is that I don't know, I'm not sure what it is. It's tough to add categories, but there should be. I agree with you. There should be a stuntman's category. There really should be, because it's such an important part of the work that goes into movie making.
Yeah.
People think, oh, it's these actors. The actors don't do any of that stuff. They don't get anywhere near it. Some of them might get close to it, but it's the stuntmen who do all that stuff.
Yeah, I wonder whether that it stems from that very thing of people wanting to think it's the actors, or maybe the actors not wanting people to know you had a stunt double. Therefore, it's kind of been sort of, yes, we don't talk about the stuntmen. They're very important, but we want you to think it's John Wayne or etc. So maybe that's kind of why it's been a little bit.
Well, that happens, but they're the better actors are always the first ones to tell you that they've got that's very interesting. There's a good the Tarantino movie about something, I can't think of the name of it, but with DiCaprio and Brad Pitt.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
It's a wonderful movie. I mean, it's real. I'm usually not a big Tarantino fan personally, but that's a really great movie, and I really responded to that film. But I think a lot of my response to that movie had to do with that I spent 2 years on the streets of San Francisco TV show. And I met a lot of actors who were like DiCaprio, who were very successful in a prior series, but now their careers were heading downhill. And I met a lot of stuntmen who were, just like the part that Brad Pitt played, and the hangers-on and all the people and, the personalities. I really thought it was kind of brilliant in a way. I really enjoyed it. Really good movie, but, because Brad Pitt plays this, stuntman for DiCaprio, and the two of them are like a team, and Pitt takes care of him, watches out for him, and it was a good movie, really good movie.
Okay, yes, it's very good, isn't it? And I don't, if you just off a little sidetrack, have you seen Hunters on Amazon Prime?
Hunters?
Hunters, yeah. I'd recommend that. That's set in the 70s, and it's got Al Pacino is in it, and it's about these people who hunt Nazis that have been, which of course did happen in that countries like Russia and America and Britain took, say, some of the Nazi scientists, those they thought they could be useful, and brought them into America, gave them new names, things like that. So it was about sort of finding these people that kind of escaped Nuremberg and all these sort of things. It's quite a sort of, it's not always serious. It is sometimes, but it's quite good.
It's a TV show.
A TV show. There's 2 series. Hunters. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I recommend that one.
I'm glad I'll have to check it out. Al Pacino's always good.
Oh yeah. The sad thing is, although he does Broadway, he's never been to the West End. He's never done he's never tread the boards over here, which would be kind of
oh really
nice to do.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have any other favorite moments from Morning Sign that we haven't touched on? Anything that you'd like to add?
No, I can't think of anything right now. Like no special stories come to mind, or no, it was a good experience. It was just such a treat to work with all of these other people who were so good at their craft, and to watch how they worked and and in working with them to appreciate why they were so well respected in the industry and had worked for so long with so many wonderful people.
I mean, was there conscious? Oh, sorry, Jim. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, it was very conscious to try to bring them onto the movie. From the very get-go, it was really conscious of me to take, Hal, who was a first-time director, which, and he was obviously well suited to the task, but nevertheless, it's still, there's still a learning curve in doing that. And to consciously, with his help, try and bring in the best people possible, to make the movie. So
Yeah.
it's so to be able to work with, with Dean Cundy and particularly Bumstead, who'd worked on all these, in production designers, he's sort of a legend in Hollywood, having worked, and I forgot, with Hitchcock, with George Roy Hill, with Clint Eastwood. He's this great production designer. It was what a treat it was to get him on the movie. And then to work with Bob Lawrence, who was a great editor, who had worked with Kubrick, and Alan Splett, the sound designer. It's just wonderful to be able to populate your movie with all of these great technicians. It can't but help the making of the movie.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it really, and it's a shame that I'm glad that you saw the movie and liked it, and you can probably appreciate things about it, maybe in retrospect now that I'm talking about it, which would be, the sound design, the editing, the production design, the look of the movie, the photography of the movie, how well and rich the movie looked. Cundy did this wonderful job. There are all of these, wonderfully illuminated oranges and blues and yellows in the laboratory, and the coloring and the darkness of the hallways. And the other thing that's so great about the movie is the use of the videos of when Joni is in her security cubicle. A lot of it is told through people, through video cameras talking to her, faces close up against these video surveillance cameras, let us in, Joni, let us in, stuff like that, or we need help, or don't open the doors, or, it adds this whole new level of suspense to the storytelling. It was really quite remarkable. So there was a movie a couple of years ago that came out. I forget the name of it, but it was sort of done during the pandemic about a writer, I think, for The Guardian, a woman who was trying to figure out why women were being kidnapped to go to the Middle East to become ISIS wives. And she sort of sets herself up to do that. And it's all done through computer screens, and it was really quite compelling to watch the film. Even though it's a movie, it's all being sort of done through, like we're talking on Zoom right now. You get two images, and she's just trying to do this to expose them.
Yeah.
And it was quite, it's quite remarkable at how, she's lying. The people who are trying to attract her to come in are lying. Everybody's lying to each other, about what they're doing. And, it's quite a pretty interesting story. If I think of the name of it, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do. It sounds really good.
Yeah. Quite interesting.
So, that does point to one scene in Warning Signs where the military personnel are ambushed in this corridor, and it's very dimly lit, and everyone's looking at the video monitors, helpless.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Sam saying it's a trap, get out, but they can't.
Trap, get out. Right.
Yeah. So that theme we were mentioning, I thought, that's a very good example of it.
Yeah, because you're watching it all through these black and white, low resolution kind of TV monitors everywhere. The other thing, it's kind of interesting is that, a lot of that video work was done by some young, talented, who later went on and became great visual effects artists, a guy named Greg McMurray. And I think it was his wife was Rhonda Gunn. And there was a third person who went on to work and set up a company called Rhythm and Hues in Los Angeles, which is a very successful visual effects company. I can't remember his name, though, although it could have been Hughes, but he and McMurray were the guys who did the video work, and there's a lot of computer stuff happening too, which was pretty early for 1984. There weren't a lot of computers around. I remember Hal and I had computers. We were sort of some of the first people who ever used computers on a movie production. They were, there weren't a lot of them, for the production and for the work. And now everything is the whole world is computerized that way. So
Hmm.
I remember I had one of the very first, what was I using? One of the, was a Macintosh Portable, I think I had on the picture. I don't remember what year it was. If not, it was a little, the original Apple, computer. I think it's what the name of it was now. I still have that Macintosh Portable in the garage. It still works. You can turn it on. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's quite a beautiful machine.
I mean, Hal was saying that it had, I think it was about 30 days roughly to shoot the film, and despite the small budget, he was very happy with the final outcome, and couldn't really think of anything that he would sort of change. So I assume you echo his
Oh yeah,
his comment.
I know. The only thing I would change is to get the studio interested, to spend a few more $1 million to go out and advertise the picture so people would know about it. Open it in some more theaters and spend some more money advertising it, putting, TV and newspaper ads and stuff. That was that was my joke. People say they like the movie. I go, great, you and my mother. I don't even think my mom liked the movie actually, but but the idea being that nobody knew about it, unfortunately, was the problem. It's like you make a good movie and like nobody's ever heard about it because word never really got out. But maybe now it's developing a small, a smaller sort of cult following. I do talk to people who go, oh yeah, I know that picture. That was a really good movie. They enjoyed it. They sort of come onto it later, and like you, and sort of see it and go, oh, that was fun. I enjoyed that. It was exciting, very tight, well constructed, well written, well acted. They appreciate all of the good qualities of the movie, which is great.
Oh yeah, and I think for a film to be successful, sometimes a lot of successful, really good films aren't successful. So it's almost you're in very good company with Warning Sign, because there's so many films that didn't didn't connect or wasn't marketed correctly, and there's so many films out there that are very good that didn't, so it's almost, to have a really good film means it wasn't successful. So I think it's one of those paradoxical things there, really. And I just want to finish off, Jim, how does Warning Sign sit in your body of work? Is it sort of in the top few? How do you kind of sort of put it in your career?
Oh, it's one of my, because I was the producer, it's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
Because I, had much more, I had this much more of me in the production of that movie than a lot of the other movies that I've worked on. So it's way up there.
Yeah.
I feel I'm very proud of it. Which I keep going back to the technical credits and the production of the movie and the look and all of that. I'm very, very pleased with how all that all turned out. And also I was, Hal and I have been, friends for a million years. So working with him was a treat and a pleasure as well. We get along well, and it was a fun time. And the other thing is that the other part of making a movie is populating a film with good people who enjoy working and trying to keep the environment, which is naturally stressful, stress-free, by just getting not creating problems and not having big egos around. And that's you try to hire people who sort of do that, who people would say, gee, this film is actually fun to work on, we're having a good time, everybody's so nice. It's like, well, great, it's hard enough to make movies anyway, why shouldn't you work with people who are respectful, and men and women who are human, and treat each other with respect and whatnot. And people, there's life's too short to be surrounded by screamers. It doesn't add anything. I've always been the kind of manager who believes that you get the best out of people by being nice to them there and listening to them, and understanding that the effort is collaborative, that everybody has good ideas, and if somebody has an idea, that you should listen to it, because quite often their ideas are better than yours, and if not, then sometimes 1 + 1 = 3. They have an idea, you have an idea, and all of a sudden you're off in a whole new direction that neither of you thought of, but it only came to be because you had this this conversation with someone on how to do it. So yeah, it was.
I mean, did you have much? Sorry, Jim.
No, go ahead.
Oh, do you have much of a? Is there bits in the film where you can go, oh yes, this was my idea, or was there a lot that you brought into the film in terms of the characters or the story, or maybe
No, I
how
think
certain scenes
a lot of
shaped? Or...
no, not in that sense. I mean, a lot of that was all Hal, but in looking at the locations and how things were put together and done, and yeah, I mean, I definitely feel a part of all the different parts of the movie.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I feel very, very pleased with all that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good film, and I wouldn't have discovered it, unless we had talked about it. So
you haven't spoken to me, right?
Yeah. So I thank you for introducing to me to something that I wouldn't have otherwise seen. It's always quite nice to discover a hidden gem. So
oh, good. Well, thanks. That's nice to hear. Great. That's great.
Well, thank you very much, Jim, for talking to me. It's a real pleasure as always.
Oh, my pleasure, Philip.
So take care, Jim. Enjoy your trip, and
thank you, Philip. It's nice to see you again.
And you, Jim.
Good. Stay well, and thanks for all your kind words before.
And the same to you, Jim. Thanks very much. And
okay.
Yeah, take care.
All right. Have a good night. See you later. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, Craig. How are you, sir?
Good. Excellent.
Good.
How are you?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you very much. So, well, thank you very much for wanting to talk to me about Warning Sign. It is most kind of you. I think my audience might quite like just to have a little bit of background before about you, first of all, sort of kick off. So my first question was, when did you realize that you were musically talented, and how did your career in music kind of take off?
Oh, well, my career in music, I played piano most of my life, and I started writing songs when I was, 12, 13. But I was a fine arts major in college, mainly because I think my parents didn't want me to be a musician. And then I just started getting in more to writing musicals, working in electronic music in college, learning instrumentation, although I never became a music major. I just was curious about it, so I learned. And then I spent a year on a fellowship in Essex and writing songs. And I came back to Los Angeles and was performing as a singer-songwriter. And wasn't going that great. And then when I was around 24, I got a call from an old college friend that she had married a guy who had made a very cheap horror film on what was super 16 millimeter film back then. And he was attending AFI, American Film Institute in Los Angeles, and they needed music. And I was the only musician they knew in Los Angeles that I know who could do it. And I went, I'll do it. No problem. And I did it, and the movie never got released, although the director went on to greater things, who was John McTiernan. But I realized after doing that experience that I would much rather be a film composer than a pop songwriter. It much more matched my talents, much more. And my career just suddenly took off like crazy. And by the time I was 25, I was doing feature films, and I was very young. So somehow I survived the experience.
Yes.
Which wasn't easy. In retrospect, I'm going, okay, somehow I just did it. I just stepped up and figured it out every inch of the way.
So from the very beginning, the work was quite consistent. You hit the ground running. It was quite a good.
It was it was consistent for about 30 years. Then it slowed down. So I had 25, 30 really, really busy years where I basically never stopped.
Oh, wow. Did you prefer working on TV or film? I suppose for film you had more toys to play with, more time, etc.
Yeah, film, I think film, the product ended up better because you had more resources and more time. The good thing about television was that nobody was looking over your shoulder. So you were in television, in a funny way, you're much freer just to write music. And as long as the music seems like it sort of fits the picture, everybody's very happy. And the schedules are so quick. Also, when you do a TV show, the producers know how much money they're making. It's a sold product. Whereas when you do a film, you put all this money out and you go, gee, I hope somebody watches this film and I make money off of it. And so there's a huge amount of anxiety that travels with feature films that does not exist in television. So they both have their rewards. I've done a lot of both. I was sort of unique at that time. Now, of course, everybody does Netflix and everything, which is similar to the TV I used to do. So people now do both again. But
and how do you feel about music in TV and film as it is now compared to when you were at your height?
Well, there's a lot of really good music. I've heard quite a few nice scores. I think the overall direction of music, especially in feature films, has been less thematic, less melodic, or are those basses or is that a sound effect? You have it's a lot harder to discern what's music and what the function of music is in films now. Now, that's not every film, obviously, but I think as a general movement, directors have moved away from wanting big themes. Unless John Williams is writing the score, obviously, but for everybody else, you can't really whistle the themes. You don't really relate to them. I don't think the music is pulling your emotions the way it used to. It's become much more part of an overall sound picture, including, the dialogue, the effects, the electronics, and the music, and they're all sort of mixed together. And I think that's obviously different than the kind of music I would write. Although Warning Sign is a little more in that genre in a funny way.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of sound, there is a theme, but it's very much sound oriented.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I must mention your fantastic involvement with, and very long running involvement with Cheers. I just wanted to know how that came about, and is there any highlights from doing Cheers?
Well, my wife was friends with a producer named Linda Solomon, who was married to Jimmy Burrows. And Jimmy Burrows was a director producer. He had directed a lot of the TV show Taxi. I don't know if you know that show.
Yeah.
But we were at their house and basically just were hanging out. And Jimmy said, hey, do you want to do my new TV shows, Cheers? And I said, yeah, why not? That was about it. And I read the script and it was great. And I was on the show for 11 years. So, but it was never a lot of work. There's very little music in it. So I would usually maybe write 4 episodes at a time. And some of it was library music that I had written. But it was fun to be involved with. I mean, it's a classic show now. It was #1 for years. It won a lot of Emmys. We had a lot of good parties and a lot of good caviar and cigars along the way. And it's a fun show to be involved with.
You weren't never asked. I don't know. Were you ever asked to carry on with Frasier, or was that?
No, I was never asked. The producers. Well, first of all, I think Kelsey wrote the theme for Frasier, and then I'm not sure who did it. I can't remember, but no, they sort of went in their own direction.
And did you have any input into the Cheers theme? I know it wasn't written by you, but
no, it was not written by me. No, when Jimmy Burrows asked me to do the show, I said, "You want me to do the theme?" He said, "We already have a theme we love, so you wouldn't be doing that." And so I went, "Okay, that's too bad, but I can still make the incidental music my own." And I came up with my own sound for it, which was very consistent for 11 years. It was exactly the same approach to music.
And of course, you could interweave the theme as well, so you had that to play with.
Occasionally, yeah. I didn't do that too much, but a little bit I did, sure. Yeah.
I was quite curious about the silent films that you did new scores of, and how that kind of came about.
Well, that came about. I'm not sure how many years ago. It's probably about 8 years ago. I was contacted by a group called the Dallas Chamber Symphony in Dallas, Texas, and they were doing programs where they did new scores to silent films, and then the other half they did very modern works. And it was a chamber group. It was not a big orchestra. It was like 12, 14 musicians. And they asked me if I would do The Kid, the Charlie Chaplin film. And I went, sure. I mean, I don't know the film, and I've never done a silent film, but I'd love to do it. So I did it. It was a lot of fun. And then there's a local orchestra here that's more symphony size orchestra in Los Angeles. And they said, can we do it? I said, yeah, I'd have to reorchestrate it to make it for a 65-piece orchestra, but sure, that would be fun. And so they did that, and they were performing summer, besides a winter program where they did more traditional classical films, classical music. They did a program every summer outside in a park in the marina overlooking the boats and the water, and people would bring wine and food, and it was a couple thousand people, free, paid for by the park system here. A couple thousand people showed up, and so they had done The Last Starfighter and I think Remo, and so they said, well, that was so much fun to do The Kid, and it was so successful. They brought in big jumbotrons to show the movie, and so they said, why don't you do another one? Let's do Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney. I said, great. And I did that. That was a lot of work because it's a full-length movie. And then last summer, they said, why don't we commission you to do another one? How about The General, which is a great Buster Keaton movie, and that's a fantastic film. And so that was performed by the orchestra last August here in LA. There was sort of about 2 years of COVID where the orchestra wasn't playing, of course, but now they're all back. And Phantom is now being done by 2 more orchestras around the country this October. So it's starting to be done by other orchestras, which is great.
Yeah, it's a very good idea. I mean, how faithful did you want to be to the music that had already been done for those, or do you just feel you had a free hand of it?
I had a free hand because, first of all, a lot of the times you don't know what the original music is, and some of them didn't really have original music. So they had maybe some sketches, but usually it would go to a town, and if there wasn't an orchestra that they had to write to, there was just one person on a piano or on an organ, and they were sort of improvising along the way, So I don't think the music was locked in. I mean, a lot of these you can't really, I don't think I've ever heard what the music was to Phantom, although I think there may have been a score at some point. And same with The General. I mean, you can find other composers over the years who've taken a crack at it like me, but not the original. And the Chaplin movie, he wrote the music in retrospect to everything, so he could recopyright all of his works. So the Chaplin is copyright free in America, but cannot be performed. You couldn't perform my score in the UK.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or in the EU, because of copyright laws.
So you can't get your version of the film on physically on disc, or it's only in live and on your website.
I could put it on disc. I could certainly put it on disc here if I wanted to, but you couldn't legally sell it in the UK or the EU or other locations as well.
Right. And you're getting towards Warning Sign. I believe your association with Hal Barwood and when started, was it Corvette Summer?
Yes. So we met. I'm not really sure how I got that picture. Someone recommended me. It looks like it was 78. So I was maybe 29 when I got that movie.
Hmm.
And I had just come off the Bad News Bears. And yeah, so that was it. So we did, it looks like we did 4 projects together. And I still am in contact with Hal and Matthew. Matthew Robbins and Hal Barwood. We occasionally exchange emails or see each other. Yeah, so Corvette Summer was the first one with Mark Hamill and Annie Potts.
Was that a fun film to score?
That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. You know, it was right after Star Wars, so Mark Hamill was just off of Star Wars. And so it had that energy, and it was a fun movie. And I got to sort of experiment. I used a full orchestra, but I used a lot of synthesizers playing live with the orchestra. They weren't pre-recorded, or it was all live. And so there's a lot of rhythmic synthesizers going on with the full orchestra. So it was, and drums. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing that movie.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I believe it was the Ballad of Billie Jean, or the Legend of Billie Jean.
Yeah. So then they did the Legend of Billie Jean, which was more of a rock and roll score. So it was much more synth oriented, but with a lot of guitars. And then they had a Pat Benatar song that she did that was called Invincible, that was used, and I used some of that in the music. And that was much darker, because it wasn't really a comedy. It was much more of a St. Joan's story, you know, more of a tragedy, but with a very pop rock kind of feeling to it. So the music was very, you know, dark, somewhat aggressive, very synthy guitar kind of score.
And of course, the same year we have I believe Warning Sign is
Right.
also 85. What was your initial? Do you remember what your feeling was when you had the script for Warning Sign, or you saw?
Yeah. Well, I never really read a script, as I recall. I think I just saw. So those first 2 films you mentioned had been directed by Matthew Robbins.
Yes.
And they were written by Hal Barwood and Matthew, and Hal Barwood produced those movies. So when they got to Warning Sign, they switched places, and Hal directed, and Matthew wrote with Hal and then produced. So I think Hal just hired me because he knew me from those other 2 films. And the first thing I thought was that this would be a fun movie to do completely electronically. And so I gave them that idea, and they loved it. I said, you know, like no guitars, nothing, just completely electronics, which fits the sort of bio zombie genre, as it were. There weren't that many zombie movies being made back in that day either. I mean, you know, now obviously there's a million of them, but back then, you know, you didn't think of it as a classic zombie movie, you know, all that it was to come. But my concept was that it would just be completely electronic, no orchestra, no guitars. And there was this new instrument called the synclavier, and I was really keen to own it. And it was extremely expensive because it wasn't like previous synthesizers that basically had sounds. It was, you could actually record into it and then play back the recordings on your keyboard. You could record, I think, up to 12 seconds, and that was it. And only monophonically, only one at it. You could only play one, it's called a sample. You could only play one sample at a time. So I came up with all these different sounds and voices that I bought the synclavier, and it was like $75,000. So at the time, and that's in the, you know, early 80s. So that, I don't know what that would be now. It would be hundreds of thousands of dollars now. And at that time, the pound was actually, I think, $2.50. So how times have changed, huh? You know.
Indeed, yeah.
I think it was 2.50 when I lived in London. Anyway, yeah. So I bought it and just kept renting it back to Fox Pictures instead of an orchestra. They just rented it from me the whole time and basically paid for the whole thing. But it was really challenging because there were 3 volumes this thick, how to use the thing, because it had so many different parts. It ran on Unix and went to a screen, and there were no windows in that screen. It was literally, you had to go into DOS to run it. So it was all these prompts and weird commands to do anything. The discs that recorded it had regular synthesis too, which was great. But the discs were, I mean, they were like, I don't know, 14, 16-inch discs, and they would only record 12 seconds of sound each disc. And when you wanted to play that back, you'd have to go load the disc into it. I don't think there was enough RAM to keep those things. You know, it's sort of amazing, but that was where it was at. And so I did that. So I came up with a lot of sounds and just went from there and just did a complete synth score.
And I believe that this was another 20th Century Fox picture, and I think the budget probably wasn't perhaps as strong as maybe your other projects with Hal and Matthew. Did that in any way restrict, not from your point of view?
No, I have no idea what the budget was of any of those 3 films.
Yeah.
The only really expensive score was Corvette Summer because it had a big orchestra.
Okay.
The other ones were me working with synth players. Like on Billie Jean, I worked with a lot of different synth players and guitar players. So those had to be hired, obviously. And on Warning Sign, I just did it all myself. But I don't know what the budget, I chose that route for Warning Sign because I thought it was a cool way to go with that film. There were no budget considerations at all.
I think from the very beginning of the score, I think it's a lovely score. And I know when I spoke to Hal and Jim Bloom, the co-producer, they both agreed that there's it's just the setting up and over the cornfields being sprayed and sort of the open spaces versus what we're going to get a bit later on with the claustrophobia and it's just you get a very sort of almost Vangelis sort of sound coming through, and it's sort of very sort of, maybe not joyous is the right word, but it's a very nice and peaceful with a sense of foreboding and that things are going to fall apart a little bit. And I think it sets the film up.
Right. It's a little bit bucolic, and but it has the undertones with the voices that something, there's more here.
Yeah.
You know, it implies a lot. Yeah. So you talked to Hal and Jim? Did you talk to Matthew at all, or?
No, I haven't been able to find a contact for Matthew. And I know obviously I could probably ask yourself or Hal, but it might be something to perhaps look into, because it started just as a quick project with Jim, sort of, as a one-on-one sort of thing, and sort of quickly exploded as these things tend to do. Right. But they were very complimentary of the music, and obviously did you have a small choir as well to work with, or was that all sort of?
No, that's all my wife, Linda, and I just had her sing into the microphone, and then I would play it. You could play it back on the keyboard. She could sing one note, and I could play back 6 different notes, all with her voice pitched differently, that the computer would pitch. So all that is her. The other sound that I used a lot is that big sound. There's like a big, that was an identifier. And what that was a grand piano. This is a little complex. And if you put your finger on the low string and sort of prevent it from vibrating, and then hit the string with the key, it goes boom. And then if you take that sound and reverse it, it goes, it's like one of those. I mean, now you probably heard it a million times, but I guess in 1985, nobody was doing that kind of sound. And that became the identifying sound to it.
Oh, yeah, so it racks up the tension, doesn't it? That one sound rather perfectly. I mean, as a composer, is it tempting to score everything, or do you? Because I think the really good composers know what not to score and what to just let play. And
Yeah.
Is that something that also comes from the director, kind of sort of guide you a little bit?
Yeah, both. Generally, you would sit with the director and maybe the editor, and you would look at the film and go, well, maybe there should be music here, and you'd discuss it, and you'd figure out what should have music and what shouldn't. The thing about coming in and out of music and having spaces without it is it rests the ear. Otherwise, it gets sort of boring if it's just all the same. And conversely, when the music comes in, the audience goes, oh, that subconsciously, they don't notice. The audience virtually never notices the music at all, unless it's a big melodic score. I've said 100 times, what did you think of the music? Oh, yeah, it was good. Nobody, that isn't the purpose of film. The purpose of film music is to hit you where you can't stop it. It's to hit you subconsciously where your brain can't stop the emotion that the music conveys, whether it's terror or, love or ecstaticism, whatever that word is. The music goes right into your body and actually makes you feel things, and it's just wired into your brain. So that's what film music does. It's very rarely, listen to the music, because 99% of the time, if you asked people about the music of any project, they would have a hard time saying anything more than, oh yeah, I guess it was okay, it was good, or that isn't what film music is about. It shouldn't take you out of the picture. It should take you into the emotion of the picture. So part of it doing that is to have blank spaces where there's no music. So when the music comes in, subconsciously, it's telling you, oh, pay attention here, or, oh, there's an emotion coming and you can't stop it.
I think sort of thinking about more modern scores, film and TV, I think there seems to be perhaps more music and perhaps more of a temptation not to have quiet moments, and almost competing with people's attention spans perhaps a little bit. It seems to be a bit more of in some things, just it seems to be
maybe,
a lot
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's possible. I think sometimes it's from the nervousness of the director or of the studio executives, that they're nervous to have silence and to have that sort of space. They get nervous. And now there's a lot more interference from all the other people besides the director in terms of the music. Everybody is party to the decisions because the music can all be heard before it's really recorded. It can all be mocked up, which wasn't the case back then. So, now there's a lot more micromanaging. So there's a lot more, oh, this should have music. There's a lot more politics, I think, going on.
So I suppose you noticed that as your career went on, was it not as unpleasurable to do it, but it seemed to get more complex working. I
think in some ways it's more complex because now, in a way it's safer, because it used to be you'd show up with the orchestra and nobody would have heard anything. Maybe they would have heard a theme on the piano. They'd have to imagine what an orchestra would sound like playing a theme, which isn't easy. And so the recording sessions would be very high tension because it would be the first time people would hear the music. Now everything is heard before, so that's good. But on the other side, there's so much more micromanaging of the music itself.
Hmm. What was your thoughts when you saw Warning Sign finished? Were you happy with the project? Did you like it as a film?
Yeah, I thought it was what it was. Honestly, I didn't think it was a great film, but I thought it was fun to watch and had a good story, and I liked some of the actors, and I liked the music. I thought the music was really unusual and gave it a sort of a patina that was different than if it was a normal orchestral film score. So I enjoyed it. Yeah, I did.
I think Hal and Jim are very happy with the film, but I think they were, of course, a bit frustrated that the money perhaps wasn't quite what they would have liked. But I suppose that's probably the same for sort of 99 and 100
Well,
projects.
I wasn't really party to any of those discussions. I was left alone to just write the music, and it was, I basically just dealt with Hal and maybe Matthew a little and maybe Jim a little, but mostly Hal. And it was a pleasure. I mean, I love Hal. Hal's a wonderful, wonderful guy.
Oh yeah, it was lovely to
wonderful to work with, and we were very good friends. So,
I mean, was the dynamic very different from your point of view because it was Hal directing rather than Matthew, or were you kind of all very close at that point? It didn't kind of matter who was behind the camera.
We were all close, and I basically approached every film the same in terms that I just tried to do the best, and I've always tried to find the right sound for each picture. So I don't just if you listen to my music, it's not just one sound that I do over and over and over. Each one is try to come up with a palette for each film. So, I mean, Hal has a different personality than Matthew. So you're dealing with a different personality, but I didn't have any problem with any of those guys. They were great.
Oh, good. Do you have any particular favorite moments from the film in terms of your score that you think, oh, this is your favorite cue? Or
wow, I should have watched the film before seeing you today. I don't think I've seen the film in 30 years. So, I mean, not to just repeat what you said, but I do like the opening very much in that it is very open. There's not a lot happening. You're letting the sound sort of play. So I felt really good about that. I like the action music, but it's very different than other action music I've done in that it's not perfectly rhythmic. It has a jaggedness that people seem to like a lot. When it few years back, well, it's been a few years now, but there was a CD and a vinyl released at the time, and then I sort of forgot about the film, and then I guess it was 6-7 years ago, I got a call from the people at Invada Records, who were in Bristol, I believe. They're part of the Portishead group, and they do a lot of soundtracks. And they said how much everybody loved that soundtrack because it was like a heavy metal soundtrack. That was their point of view, and so I went, oh, I guess it is sort of heavy metal because it's a lot of drum samples, and it's very aggressive when the zombies start going crazy. So. But I do like it. I love the sound. I like the percussion sound, and I love the voice. I love the use of the voices. They're really eerie and sort of cool.
I suppose because it's not a traditional orchestral score, it's part of what makes the film feel a bit. It gives you the feeling of it being a very unsettling environment because the music is kind of perhaps playing against perhaps what you would normally hear, and you've got the boom and all that kind of. So it's sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I thought the electronics would be unsettling, because even when they're calm, they're unsettling, just in their own nature. And yeah, very much so. And I don't think even though I've written action or horror scores using traditional instruments, there's something about that synclavier sound. It has a unique sound that is really very rich and sort of foreboding, and it has a lot of interesting overtones. I like it a lot. Yeah.
I think one of my favorite cues is the end title. It's sort of very much
yeah.
sort of referencing, of course, the main title, but it's got a bit more of a sort of joyous relief to it, but also, of course, still got the sense of this isn't quite over. It's going to
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it has the melody, da 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 da. I think the melody is sort of like that. It's a very simple theme. It's not like it's just a few bars, but it brings out that melody. But you're right. It's going. Oh well, we haven't seen the last of this. So it's resolution and non-resolution at the same time.
And I did say to Jim and Hal that certainly with the pandemic we've had, it's almost as if reality has overtaken fiction, as it tends to do. And if you were to make a sequel or something like this, people wouldn't believe it, because it's like, well, reality's worse, sort of. They wouldn't.
Bio Wuhan.
Yes. Yeah. So I was just wondering about some of your other, because of course you've got a fantastic list of credits. Of course, I must reference the Last Starfighter, that nice post you
Yeah.
down.
Everybody loves that score, so I become associated with that music a lot. Yeah, that was another. That was a totally joyous score to do, and the film. I love the film, and in terms of working with people, Nick Castle, who directed that, and I think about 5 other films I did, along with Matthew and Hal, were just great people to work for. They were critical when they needed to be, but they were really open to, let's see what this guy does. They weren't pressured. They didn't pressure me. They just were really open. And The Last Starfighter was like that too. It was just a wonderful, and that, of course, I had all the money in the world for a huge orchestra. And but there was a lot of synths in that too. They were played live with the orchestra. I used to like doing that. So that score really has lived on. It's been out on CD, I think, four times.
And you seem to have done pretty much every genre there is: comedy, horror, etc. Do you have a favorite genre?
Wow. Well, I like doing these big orchestral things now. I've sort of moved away from synths a bit, and I love doing big melodic, but I like doing weird orchestra where it's just sound pictures and things like that. So I sort of get into every kind of music. I'm a very eclectic kind of composer. I think because I was a fine artist, and I just would always go, the first thing would be, well, what's the palette of this film? Okay, just electronics with a piano and a voice for Warning Sign, or okay, big romantic Sibelius orchestra for Last Starfighter, or or Legend of Billie Jean. Okay, contemporary guitar, electric guitars, rock, dark rock. You'd sort of figure out, well, what's the palette, and then you'd stick to it. You wouldn't suddenly throw in a trumpet, to a Warning Sign, or or a violin solo. You'd create the colors, the musical colors you'd want to use. And Cheers was like that too. Okay, it's a bar band, no electronics, no electric instruments, and a clarinet who doesn't play very well. That's what it was for 11 years. It was sort of barrel stride piano, clarinetist who could barely hit the high notes, and just guitar, no electric guitar, just very down to earth, like late night in a bar. Not a pub, a bar.
Yeah. I mean, you never felt a bit constrained or a bit bored with doing something for so long? Was it always kind of fun to
No,
do?
because it was not very time consuming. I did all these other movies that you've been talking about while I was doing Cheers, because Cheers was, each episode would have a couple minutes of music. I mean, I would write it. They'd send over 4 episodes in those days VHS tape, and I'd write them in the afternoon and record them the next day. I mean, it was fun. Plus, plus I was making a living as a composer, which was important at that time in my life. I had a family, and you can't discount that you're making a living doing this sort of odd job that nobody else really knows how to do.
I mean, because of obviously it is making a living. Have there been projects that you've been less enthusiastic about, or does everything pose an interesting challenge, and therefore you enjoy it all?
I try to. There are plenty of projects that I've done that I did that probably I just did because I needed to make a living and I was worried about it. But when I'd get into the project, I would try to make it my own and make it as interesting as possible. Because otherwise I'd just be bored doing it. I love writing music. So you find something that's interesting or some musical point of view that turns you on. So
yeah. And did you always arrange your own stuff and orchestrate it and conduct it, and do you like to do all those aspects?
No, I conducted everything, but nobody orchestrates all of their own music. Not John Williams. I don't think John Williams has orchestrated in 50 years. I mean, it's way too much work when you think you have to write a symphony's worth of music in 8 weeks. You have to write the music. It has to fit the film, and then you have to orchestrate it for a full symphony orchestra. I mean, it's virtually an impossible. I did it when I was younger, but it was in Last Starfighter. I orchestrated, I think, a third of the cues, and then Alf Clausen did a third, and Joel Rosenbaum did a third. There were 3 orchestrators. When I started out, I remember I was very green, and I remember talking to the head of music at MGM when I was doing Corvette Summer. And I said, I don't understand. Bartók didn't have an orchestrator. Stravinsky didn't have an orchestrator. And he sort of took me aside and said, yeah, but you're going to need one. Let me show you how it works. And he took me to the music library at MGM Studios. And he pulled out an Elmer Bernstein score and the sketch written on 4 lines. And he showed me how Elmer did it. Then he brought out a Jerry Goldsmith score, and he said, see, he wrote on 7 lines because his music was more complex. But that's it. He had an orchestrator, and he basically showed me all these really wonderful composers who were my idols and how they sketched so that the orchestrator would know exactly what they wanted. And I think if you listen to The Last Starfighter, you would never know who orchestrated what. It all sounds the same. But yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on, Craig.
No, that was it. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I was just wondering. So you've got an orchestrator working on your scores. How much do they bring to the score? How much do they sort of twist and turn you've got? Does it sometimes go to surprising directions, or you very much?
No.
Yeah.
No, I think a good orchestrator figures out what's in your mind and does it. And I think if you write good sketches, you know what it's supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
Now they can bring great balance and sound and and the ability for the orchestra to play things, and so it sounds great with the orchestra. That's the talent. Like, for example, if you have a chord with 6 notes, well, where do you put the clarinets? Where do you put the violins? Where do you put the flutes? Where's the French horn? Do you use a muted trumpet in there? There's a million little choices that give the overall sound, but and that's what an orchestrator does. They make it sound great.
And did you get to meet people like Jerry Goldsmith, John Williams, people that probably
Oh
were
yeah,
trying to?
yes. I met a lot of them. I went to when I started out. People, and I was in my early 20s. People would invite me to their recording session. So, and then one of my mentors was Elmer Bernstein. So I went to some of his scoring sessions. I went to John Barry, I remember. I went to Jerry Goldsmith when he did a movie called Coma. I was sat in the back of that one. Yeah, so I've met almost everybody. I met you know, over the years.
Hmm. They all sort of, I suppose they all had their unique styles in terms of the way they conducted, or
They all did.
did anyone particularly strike you as being, oh, that's an interesting approach or style or you know, a character?
Well, they all had their style. I mean, John Barry had a very specific way of writing romantic scores. That now that's different than his James Bond scores, but all of his like Out of Africa or Dances with Wolves, he had a very specific sound. And same with Elmer. Elmer had his sounds. He had many different sounds, Elmer Bernstein, but you know, you could almost always tell it was his score. And obviously Jerry Goldsmith would grab more of modern techniques, and you know, he'd grab into Bartok, he'd grab into Stravinsky. You know, he would use a lot of the colors from contemporary composition.
And he did a lot of synthesizers towards the end of his life as well, I think, with a couple of things like Star Trek and.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I guess so. I wasn't that aware, but I guess he did a lot of synths, yeah.
I mean, I think less so than you know, sort of maybe 10 years beforehand. And you're right. I think each composer has a sound, don't they? So John Barry, you can hear Somewhere in Time, Dance with Wolves.
Yeah.
You know, there's a certain thematic palette that sort of runs.
Yeah. Somewhere in Time and Dances with Wolves and Out of Africa. I mean, all those, even King Kong. I mean, they all have that. That's beautiful, beautiful melodic, warm melodic sound.
Also, a lot of Moonraker as well. You can see a little bit of that in Out of Africa.
A lot of what?
Moonraker. So some of his Bonds kind of sort of seep into. I think there's.
I guess I don't hear a lot of Bond. I don't hear a lot of Bond in Out of Africa, but.
Yeah, well, just a little bit. I mean, I was listening to Last of the Mohicans earlier, and I was thinking, this sounds a bit like the Cliffhanger score, the Sylvester Stallone picture, and lo and behold, it was the same guy, Trevor Jones. So I do, you know, that's.
Well, the Last of the Mohicans was two composers.
Oh right.
Let's see, that was Michael Mann, and the other one was Rennie Harlan, who I did Nightmare on Elm Street with, and I did The Thief. The whole ending of Thief I did for Michael Mann.
But was he an interesting director to work with?
He was tough. He wanted to control everything. I only did the one thing on Thief for him.
Yeah.
But
how about Rennie Harlan?
Rennie was great. I just did Nightmare on Elm Street, and then that was it. But Rennie was very easy to work with. I think he liked the score, and he sort of. That was another all-electronic score.
Yeah. And of course, you've got some more sort of comedic things with things like Mr. Wrong, the Bill Pullman, Ella DeGeneres film. Is it fun to do those kind of sort of wacky sort of comedy sort of?
That was fun, yeah. I mean, the music was fun. The experience was not fun, but because it was just not a very successful film, but unfortunately. But the director is one of my best friends, Nick Castle, who also directed Last Starfighter. But it was a difficult project politically. But the music's fun. I like the music.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I like writing comedy music. I've written a lot of it. Yeah.
And I think it's quite a difficult thing to do as well, isn't it? Sort of to be. I think a lot of composers try and sort of make the music funny, which I think sometimes.
No, you can't really do that. You have to. You really, the best comedy music sort of sits way back and just guides you a little bit, but it's not a cartoon. I like the score to Major Payne, if you've ever seen that movie with Damon Wayans. That's a comedy score.
Hmm.
And it's really a funny movie, but the music's pretty serious. So it plays against the comedy a little.
Oh yeah, yeah. Just a couple of other things that sort of piqued my interest. You did a TV movie Courage that had Sophie Loren and B.D. Williams. Does any memories from that one at all?
Courage, sure.
Yeah,
With Sophia Loren, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Jeremy Kagan directed it. Yeah, that was a fun score. It just got released on CD for the first time, I think within the last year or so. Yes, so I was working on a movie called The Stranger that was filming in Buenos Aires, but with American stars, but everyone else from Argentina. And the producer, who is a friend, said, "Hey, you want to come down and watch us shoot? I'll fly you first class to Buenos Aires." I said, "Yeah, I'm on the plane tonight. Yeah, yeah, free trip to Buenos Aires." So and there was a lot of street music in Buenos Aires. They had a lot of walking streets with no cars. And it was the first time I heard all these Peruvian bands playing the flutes and the panpipes. And I thought I'd never heard it before. It hadn't become ubiquitous yet. And so I bought all the instruments I could and I brought them back. And then I got this movie called Courage, and a lot of it opens up with being in the jungle and the cocaine trade. And I thought, well, I could use those cool sounds and the sounds from Guatemala, the marimbas and all the panpipes and stuff. And I used a lot of those sounds where the movie opens up with cocaine production in South America, and then ends up in New York City. But I thought it would be really interesting, since the movie was about the cocaine, that world, to keep the music South American, even though they're in New York City. So that was sort of a musical choice of that. So that was Courage. And it was it's not a big score. I think we had about 25 musicians, but I like it. I like that score a lot because it uses a lot of those Central American and South American instruments in it.
And of course, then you've got things like The Twilight Zone and various documentaries that you've done. So again,
Sure.
Quite an eclectic range of. Is it quite nice to do things like documentaries and?
I love doing documentaries. I'd like to be doing a documentary right now. I wish someone would call me for a documentary. I really love doing them. I've done about 4 or 5. Yeah. The one that I did that turned into a huge seller was Secrets of the Titanic. And that was for National Geographic, and it's the largest selling National Geographic title ever. And it was all the very first footage of the Titanic that no one had ever seen. And that was the first time they saw that footage, was in that documentary, before the movie Titanic, of course.
Oh, yeah, it must have been quite something to.
It was great. I think I was one of the first people to ever see the Titanic. And I was just so moved by it. The music's rather sad because it's very beautiful and underwater, but I mean, it's just has a sadness about it.
Oh yeah. I was just wondering how many instruments do you actually play?
I basically play keyboards. So
yeah.
I play synthesizer. This is a synth, this thing here. So I can play any sound with this, and then I play a lot of piano, but I don't really play any other instruments. I just know how to write for them. I've figured it out and worked with players a lot, and
So were you always somebody growing up where you could sort of hear a bit of music and then you sort of play it quite instinctively, sort of like that?
Yeah, I started playing when I was 6 years old, and I was always, and then when I started taking piano lessons when I was 7, my mother wanted me to take improvisation. She didn't want me to take classical music. So I started improvising and just being able to hear things and put them together from when I was very, very young.
And am I right in saying you've also done things like ballet and other compositions, more sort of?
I have 3 albums of my own out that are more concept albums. The first one, which is out in Perseverance Records, is called Rough Magic, and it was my impressions of Paleolithic cave art. I've always been fascinated by that, and I visited when I was very young. My wife and I visited sort of central France and went through a lot of those caves. And I always wanted to write something. And so I went back with a recorder and I recorded sounds in all the caves, also in Spain as well, in northern Spain. And recorded all the ambiences and the reverbs, which I was able to put into all this music, and made a album called Rough Magic. And then the second one I did, which is out in Varese Saraband, is called Sirens. And that's sort of a similar deal. I always loved the Odyssey. So I thought, well, I should try to find some of the locations that were in the Odyssey, even though we don't really know, it's all just conjecture. But so I visited a lot of the islands around Sicily and then the coast of Sicily, and recorded in caves and in water, and and sort of wrote a whole piece that. And then that was an album, and then that was also turned into a ballet, 3 of the pieces, and that was performed here in LA. And then my most recent album, which came out during COVID, is called LAX, and it's about my memories of Los Angeles, of growing up in Los Angeles. Because I didn't feel like traveling. It was right in the middle of COVID, so I felt, well, I probably shouldn't be gallivanting around Europe or wherever. So I just did it all around Los Angeles, and it really portrays my insider's view of Los Angeles and of all the things that have disappeared in Los Angeles.
Yeah. I did see, I think it was on your website, a clip of like a music video sort of for Sirens and sort of this sort of sirens, and that was quite fun.
Yeah, we did a video out here. It was sort of fun.
Do you have a favorite project that you've worked on in your career?
I don't think so. I mean, I like music from different projects. I like Remo Williams. I think that's an interesting score. I love Last Starfighter. I really do. I like Stand and Deliver, the movie Stand and Deliver, which I think had a lot of impact on the world, and especially within the Latino community here in LA and elsewhere. And it became an important film to the Latino community. And those are my favorite. And then, of course, I like my albums that I do. I sort of like what I'm doing at the time. I try not to look back too much, because a lot of it, I just cringe. So I just like what I'm doing at the time and try to enjoy writing.
One thing I wanted to mention was the California Reich that you did the music for. And that, I think, was probably quite an important thing to do at the time as well.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I ever did. About the Nazi Party in California.
Yes, I mean, not something that I think, particularly in Britain, you kind of would think even existed necessarily. So
no,
especially in the 70s.
Yeah, it's far away from the British consciousness for sure.
Yeah, I think there's always certain things that don't make it, and across the pond, isn't it, in terms of the news and other
yeah, but it's funny, because when was that 70s, early 70s or something? I can't remember.
I think I saw
75. Well, think about it, because the whole Trump thing and what's happening in America now is directly related to the Nazi movement in California, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of connections there.
Yeah, history seems to have a habit of sort of re-emerging and things, bubbling up, etc. So just a final thought on Warning Sign. How does that fit in your body of work? Is it something that you remain very proud of?
Yeah, I actually didn't think much of it for a long time. It didn't really come up into my consciousness, because the movie sort of didn't do that well, and people tend, over the years, people tend to gravitate around scores that are orchestral. So they love Remo Williams, they love The Last Starfighter, but the ones that are more electronic don't seem to have the fan base. And so when Invada Records called and said, we love this score and there's a lot of music people that love it, and we want to release it, you know, with a special vinyl and the blood splatter vinyl and the new cover and a double vinyl set, I was really happy about that. I thought, wow, I never really thought that anyone was touched by that music. So it was very gratifying that music, actually people were thinking about it and really liked it. So that meant a lot to me.
I think one of the things why Warning Sign didn't succeed at the time, I think part of it, again, Hal and Jim sort of came to the same conclusion, that a lot of it was the way that 20th Century Fox marketed the film. They very much marketed it as a horror, and sometimes they don't necessarily know what to do with certain films. And I must admit, when Jim said about doing Warning Sign and I saw the trailer, I thought, I hate horror, and I thought, well, something I want to do or not. And I was watching the film very cautiously and went, well, actually, this isn't what I thought it was. And I suppose a lot of people at the time thought I'll just give that a miss.
I think you're right. I don't think they knew how to market it. Fox, they were pretty hands off. I don't think, I didn't get a feeling of a lot of energy from the studio.
Yeah. But of course, it's very gratifying now that people are sort of starting to find it again.
Absolutely.
And I think it's quite interesting. Also, you have a resurgence of vinyl, the nostalgia for it, and it's sort of starting to take over.
Of what?
Of the vinyl format. It seems to be really,
Yes, that's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, I don't think I saw that coming, and I think everybody that threw away all their records probably didn't either. But
I got rid of all mine at some point. But I think what it is that the normal public that listens to music, they don't need anything. They just turn on their phone or whatever. But for people who are collectors or film music fans, they need something physical. It isn't enough to say, I have a download of Warning Sign, or I can go to Spotify and listen to Warning Sign. That it's sort of meaningless. They need, now there's a movie I did called Fade to Black, and they're coming out with a new vinyl with all the new artwork, and these sort of they're often horror films that keep coming back. But this was a Dennis Christopher thriller kind of thing, and they want. I collect old sheet music, so I know, when you collect something, you want something in your hands that you can put on a shelf or go, oh, okay, I only need 10 more Craig Safans to be complete of his work, or 8 billion more John Williams to be his, they're collectors. I'm a collector and a collector nerd from way back. So is my wife. We collect all sorts of stuff. But I know that people want having an electronic thing for a collection doesn't cut it.
No.
Right.
I feel the
maybe
same way.
Even an NFT is sort of a joke, I think, in a way.
I'm a big music fan, and I've got hundreds of CDs, thousands, much to my wife's dismay. They're everywhere. But,
yeah, exactly.
But because even if you buy a film or digital, if the rights to that particular thing disappears from the company, you lose that anyway. So you can't really own it unless you've actually got it in your hand.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's, I think, an interesting point, that the way we're consuming music and way we're buying it, and I don't know whether it's because now people are watching films on their phones and listening to music on their phone, which of course is not ideal. You're losing, say, things like cinematography, all kinds of things. Do you feel that music is kind of being a bit sort of watered down in how we're consuming it?
Sure, because you're listening to it on a telephone, even with unless you have great headphones. The headphones are pretty good, some of the new ones.
Yeah.
But I grew up in my music where you'd record in a recording studio, and then you'd listen on these giant speakers, and that was part of the experience. That isn't I don't know how many people just listen to music today. They seem to consume music on YouTube or on Twitter. You know, that's how they consume their music. They don't just listen to it. And except for the very biggest stars, they don't listen to albums. You know, they don't say, oh, so-and-so has a new album. I'm going to listen to 10 songs and see what that's all about. I mean, they might do it with Taylor Swift or Beyonce, but they don't do it in general. So the music has now become more of a visual medium than just an oral one.
Oh, yeah. I think if you're just searching for a particular song rather than listening to an album, I'm sure people do the same with film music. They're just looking for a main theme or this or that, and you're going to miss the tracks that normally you might. There's always something on a CD somewhere buried down towards the bottom, something that's really stunning that you wouldn't get unless you actually had, you know, the whole thing. So just some final thoughts, Craig. I mean, do you think that the state of film and TV music is in good health in terms of the industry at the moment?
Do I think what? Is it good?
Do you think that the film and TV music is in terms of how it's produced, do you think it's in a good place in terms of artistically at the moment?
It's hard to say. You know, I'm not really doing it anymore, so I don't have the firsthand experience. I think that there is good music that I hear on some shows when I listen to the shows or some movies. I think there's some really good music. And I think, like always, you know, there's a few people who are really good, and then there's a lot of people who are okay and can make a living at it or do their music. And it's hard to make a blanket statement. I think what I said earlier was that there's less of thematic music now. You know, so I like thematic music and I naturally gravitate towards it. But more and more, the music is more like a part of the sound picture of the whole movie. And that may work very well. It may work very well for the filmmakers.
And finally, is there anything that you want to do in the future? What does the future hold in terms of more albums, perhaps? Or
I'm not really sure. I'm playing with a new album right now. I'm waiting to hear if I'm going to do another silent film for this summer or not, or the next summer. I don't have. I've been playing a lot of classical music on the piano. I just wrote a ragtime piece for some friends of mine for 4 hands, so for 2 players playing at once. So I'm doing things like that. But I may have a new album coming out, but I'm still pondering it.
Apart from Hal and Matthew, do you have a favorite director that you've worked with in terms of that collaborative environment?
Yeah, Nick Castle.
Nick Castle, yeah. Well, unless you have any other comments you'd like to make about warning signs or anything else.
Nope, that you covered it all.
That's lovely. Well, it's been fantastic to talk to you about music in general, as of course I'm a big fan, and warning signs in particular. So it's been a real pleasure, Craig.
Great to talk to you too.
So, well, thanks so much, and take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.